Welcome. My name is Anne-Rose Kitagawa, and I'm delighted to welcome you here to the Jorgen Schnitzer Museum of Art for this afternoon symposium on the art of Japanese traditional theater, which is presented by the University of Oregon's Department of East Asian Languages and Literatures, EAL, and the Center for Asian and Pacific Studies, CAPS, and co-sponsored by this museum, the JSMA. The event was organized by EAL professor Glynne Walley, right here, in conjunction with two wonderful Japanese theater-related exhibitions that he curated here at the museum, both currently on view in our second-floor Japanese galleries. It's a very special privilege that this afternoon's event is one of the first under the banner of EAL's Yoko McLean Lecture Series in Japanese Studies, named for our own late beloved professor Yoko Matsuoka McLean, who first came to UO as an international student in 1952 and stayed essentially for the rest of her life. We don't have enough time to honor Yoko's profound legacy to this university, community, and museum, but we at the JSMA are very proud that in her student days, she worked as one of only 3 employees at this museum. After distinguishing herself during graduate school, Yoko married artist Robert McLean and went on to teach Japanese language and literature at UO for 30 years, becoming a world-renowned and yet eminently approachable professor who inspired great respect and affection from generations of students and colleagues. In addition to her very busy academic career, her partnership in a successful printmaking supply business, and her dedication to home, family, and friends, Yoko maintained warm and enduring ties with the museum where she'd worked as a student, and to whom she bequeathed over 150 amazing 20th century Japanese prints, including many by Sosaku-hanga artist Sekino Junichiro, who became a great friend of the McLean family and whose works we continue to collect using funds donated in Yoko's memory, the most recent acquisition of which we just installed in Glenn's second Japanese theater rotation. We're particularly pleased that the topic of today's program jibes so beautifully with Yoko McLean's long-standing passion for and support of Japanese language and literature at UO and this museum. I know how pleased and proud Yoko-san would be to see the erudition, enthusiasm, and excellent taste with which Professor Walley has chosen and presented the no, kyogen, bunraku, and kabuki-related materials currently on view. Moreover, to deepen our understanding and appreciation, he's gathered a stellar group of specialists for this afternoon's program, including Lawrence Kominz, Alan Scott Pate, and Matthew Shores. Glynne Walley is a specialist in Edo period Japanese literature with a PhD from Harvard University. He's also a wonderful teacher whose knowledge about and infectious passion for his material is truly inspiring. Last spring, he was awarded a JSMA academic support grant to fund 2 Japanese theater-related installations, the first of which debuted in fall 2013 on No and Kyogen, and the second that opened earlier this month on bunraku and kabuki. Glenn's grant allowed us to borrow 3 magnificent bunraku puppets from a private collection in Los Angeles and relevant Sekino prints from the Fairbanks Gallery Fine Arts Collection at OSU in Corvallis. We were also able to borrow and frame a large number of spectacular 19th and 20th century Japanese prints from local private collections, and to bring historic books from UO Library's special collections. JSMA acquisition funds were used to purchase a few relevant theater-themed works. Glynne also worked closely with our great digital team to create the lovely touchscreen display that allows gallery visitors to view Japanese theater-related images from our founder's collection of early 20th century lantern slides, and to watch short film clips representing the 4 major theatrical traditions. This is precisely the kind of multifaceted, focused, curriculum-based exhibition project that we aspire to present, and thus we'd like to acknowledge the great depth that we owe Professor Walley, who could easily have gone about teaching his Japanese theater courses without having to take on the extra work of choosing and researching original objects, strategizing loans, planning installations, writing labels, scheduling class visits, lecturing to K through 12 and senior museum audiences, organizing a symposium, and writing scholarly papers. Although Glynne disavows any expertise with Japanese theatrical material, he's developed so deep and abiding an interest that he's scheduled to present 2 different Japanese theater-related papers at 2 separate symposia in 1 week. One here today, and the other at Yale University next weekend. So I think, at the very least, this brands him as an addict, if not a specialist. The intelligence, energy, and passion that he brings to these intersecting endeavors makes Glynne an inspiration as well as a pleasure to work with. Please join me in welcoming him.
Everybody, good afternoon. I'm going to probably speak without the microphone. I'm good. Can people hear me okay? So first of all, I'd like to thank Anne Rose Kitagawa for that wonderful introduction. I'd like to welcome everybody here to our symposium on the art of traditional Japanese theater. This afternoon symposium is meant to introduce, complement, and really celebrate the exhibit of the same name that is ongoing in the Japanese galleries upstairs here in the Schnitzer Museum of Art. So if you haven't had a chance to see the exhibit yet, please go see it. At some point you'll have a chance if you stay till the end, because at 4 o'clock we'll be doing a walkthrough of the exhibit with the panelists. But also it's going to be ongoing until this coming summer, so there's plenty of time to immerse yourself. I would like to thank the museum for the academic support grant that made this possible. In particular, I'd like to thank Anne Rose, whose guidance made this whole thing possible. I would say I would like art that looks like this. And so she said, oh, well, we have these options. It was really a pleasure to work with her. And for this afternoon's symposium, I'd like to thank, of course, the museum, the Center for Asian Pacific Studies, also the Department of Art History, which is helping sponsor this, and Yokohama, East Asian Languages and Literatures, in particular the Yokohama. So I hope this afternoon's proceedings will please her. We have 4 speakers today, planning to speak about 4 different aspects of traditional Japanese theater as they relate to art in general, and specifically in many cases to the art that is on view upstairs. So really, I think this will be quite interesting if you have seen or are planning to see the art afterwards. Instead of the order that's printed on the poster, we're planning to proceed chronologically by subject matter. So I'm going to be speaking about art related to the No Theater, which comes more or less first. I will speak first, followed by Alan, Larry, and Matt in that order. We'll each speak for approximately 30 minutes. We'll take a short break between Alan and Larry, but of course, as each speaker is finishing up and the next one's coming up, please feel free to get up, grab a cup of coffee in the back. We'll save question and answers until the end, when we'll all sit up here and sort of have a panel discussion. So that'll be 3:15-ish. As I say, at 4 o'clock, when this symposium wraps up, we'll be happy to go up to the galleries, and anybody who'd like to accompany us can hear us talk to each other about these things and ask questions and just enjoy seeing the art on the walls. So that's the way we're going to go. And so I guess I'm going to segue into my talk. Thank you, Andros, for the introduction. So I am talking about one particular painting. The title of my talk is A Strange Sight Indeed, Tomoe on Stage and on the Ballot. So, the exhibit, The Art of Traditional Japanese Theater, currently on view in the Schnitzer Museum of Art, is, as we've already mentioned, an example of how the museum supports the educational mission of the University of Oregon, and of how even those of us working in fields that might at first seem quite removed from art can actually benefit from having such a museum in our midst. I am not an art historian, I'm a literary historian, and yet here we have an entire exhibit representing the mobilization of labor, knowledge, goodwill, and resources from both the museum and the community, dedicated at least in part to supporting classes that I've been teaching this year on traditional Japanese theater. I'm embarrassed with gratitude. While I'm on the subject of what I'm not, let me hasten to add that I am not a theater historian either, so I'm doubly grateful and embarrassed, really, to be on the same panel with my 3 co-presenters, because unlike them, I really have no particular expertise on theater. That makes me the perfect person to present today, because I worked on popular fiction of the 17th through 19th centuries, page, not stage, and in the course of that work, I've actually come more and more to appreciate the central role of the stage in pre-modern Japanese culture. That's where it's really at. That's not to say I'm going to give up working on novels, but I am coming to realize more and more that it's the theatrical tradition that really matters. For medieval and especially early modern Japanese, it was theater that mediated people's understanding of the past and even the present. Without an understanding, therefore, of the theatrical tradition, we often don't know what we're reading, we often don't know what we're seeing, even if we think we do. So to illustrate what I mean, I'm going to talk today about a work in the exhibit that catches everyone's eye who walks through, but that at first glance may not appear to belong in an exhibit of Japanese theater at all. I'm speaking of this painting of Tomoe, the famous woman warrior, that hangs on the large Kremlin roof of Walley. It was graciously lent to the JSNA by the owner, a member of the Eugene community. And so for us, it's a newly discovered gem, so to speak. As yet, we can't say much about it, other than that we think it's from the Edo period, probably 17th century. But we can still talk about what we see and what we should see. So what do we see? 2 mounted warriors locked in mortal combat. In the foreground is a warrior in full armor, with blue leggings on beneath his armor, astride a black horse that's galloping toward the viewer's left. This warrior is wearing a helmet and has his head tipped back, his mouth is open, his tongue is flapping, as you'll see in the close-up in a minute, and his eyes are popping out because, in fact, he is being throttled by the warrior in the background. This warrior in the background is wearing a pinkish white sleeve beneath armor, a hat rather than a helmet, and is riding a white horse that's galloping towards the viewer's right. So at first glance then, it's a battle scene, right? A particularly well-executed battle scene, I think. The contrasting expressions on the face of slayer and slain capture something of the emotion of combat, while the overlapping horses and armored limbs make the painting hard to parse at first, but in a good way, creating a pleasing sense of battlefield confusion. The painting seems meant to glorify the heroic samurai of myth and legend, if not necessarily of history. The viewer may be forgiven for assuming that this painting was placed in the gallery not as part of the theater exhibit, but to complement the museum's ever-popular souvenir. However, there's more going on. For one thing, the warrior in the back is a woman. This is evident from her long flowing hair and her facial features, which may be set in grim determination, but which are still more refined and graceful than those of her livid victim. This is unusual. There just aren't that many female samurai, even in legend, much less in history. So the sight of a woman in battle in full samurai regalia is remarkable. As the play on the subject puts it, a woman clad in armor, a strange sight indeed. So few woman warriors were there, in fact, that most Japanese viewers would immediately assume, with no further clues, that they know who this is, Tomoe. And in fact, they would be right. Various visual clues confirm that this is Tomoe. Perhaps most obvious is the way she's killing her opponent. Not by slashing him with her sword, nor by piercing him with an arrow, but by choking him. Here's how the scene is described in the medieval epic Tale of the Heike. 30 riders came into view, led by Onda no Hachiro Moroshige, a man renowned in Musashi province for his great strength. Tomoe galloped into their midst, rode up alongside Moroshige, seized him in a powerful grip, pulled him down against the pommel of her saddle, held him motionless, twisted off his head, and threw him. Actually, for those interested in the finer points of medieval slaughter, the word used in the original here, nejikiru, could be taken either to mean that she twisted the head off, as this translator has rendered it, or that she twisted it and then cut it off. Another account in a different source of the same scene phrases it less ambiguously, talking about the dagger with which she cut off the head after she twisted it. In our painting, then, she's either just about to draw her dagger or is just going to twist the head right off. I prefer the latter. Either way, it's clear that this is Tomoe killing Moroshige. So who was Tomoe, and why is she strangling this poor man? She figures in the late 12th century Genpei War, an armed conflict between two clans or federations of samurai, the Genji or Minamoto and the Heike or Taira, fighting for supremacy. The Minamoto came out on top, and Yoritomo, the Minamoto leader, had himself appointed shogun or generalissimo. From this point forward, the country was ruled by samurai, with the shogun at the head of the government, so it was a turning point in Japanese history. The big prize in this war was the city of Kyoto, seat of the imperial court and its glorious culture, and thus the most important city in the realm. At first, as the tale begins, or as the battle begins, the Heike are ensconced in Kyoto, but at the end of the war, Yoritomo's Minamoto armies have occupied the city. Before they take it, however, another Minamoto general actually does the work of driving the Heike out. This is a fellow named Kiso Yoshinaka, who we're going to need to know about today. Yoritomo essentially lets Yoshinaka capture the city for him. Then he turns on Yoshinaka. Yoshinaka is driven from the city, hunted down and slain. All of this is recounted with alternating gusto and lyricism in the 14th century epic Tale of the Heike, or Heike Monogatari. And it's here where we learn about Tomoe. We're told that she was a female attendant, quote unquote, who Yoshinaka had brought with him to the capital. Tomoe, the story goes, was especially beautiful with white skin, long hair, and charming features. She was also a remarkably strong archer, and as a swordswoman, she was a warrior worth 1,000, ready to confront a demon or god mounted on. This is unusual. As I say, there are few enough women warriors in medieval legend that whenever we see one, we automatically assume it's Tomoe, and we're almost always right. So how did she get to be a warrior? We don't know. The Tale of the Heike says nothing about it, or even about why she is at Yoshinaka's side. Other medieval sources say that she and Yoshinaka had grown up together as foster siblings, together with 2 other male warriors who would go on to be stalwart allies of Yoshinaka's. So these sources imply that perhaps she became a warrior just because she was brought up with warriors, kind of a sort of tomboy image. But all of these sources are more legendary than factual. The more reliable historical sources from the period don't mention her at all. In the legends, however, she's a stalwart companion of Yoshinaka, fighting at his side right up to the end. When Yoritomo's forces drive Yoshinaka from the capital, and he's fleeing for his life, Tomoe is one of a select few retainers to accompany him. But then, when it's clear that he's going to die, Yoshinaka suddenly seems to remember that she's a woman and sends her away, saying it would be unseemly to let people say Lord Kiso kept a woman with him during his last battle. As far as Tomoe is concerned, this is a fine time for Yoshinaka to suddenly insist on his male dignity. So it may be as much out of pique as loyalty that she then kills Moroshige, the moment depicted in our painting. She wants to show her lord one last battle before she flees, perhaps out of thwarted defiance. After twisting off Moroshige's head, we're told that she discarded armor and helmet and fled. This is significant. Presumably, once she takes off her armor and helmet, she's identifiable as a woman, or more precisely, not identifiable as a warrior, and therefore isn't a target. The Tale of the Heike is the standard version of the story, but it's not the only one. Royal Tyler has written a great deal about the Tomoe legends and the note play that incorporates them, and he introduces an interesting alternate account from a source called Genpei Josuiki, or The Rise and Fall of the Minamoto Taira. In this version, Tomoe beheads the man, who is in this account called Uchida no Saburo, before Yoshinaka sends her away. And then when Yoshinaka sends her away, he gives 2 reasons. First, as in the standard account, he doesn't want it said that he had a woman with him at the end. Second, he says, last year when we rode from Shinano, I left my wife and children behind, and now I must be parted from them forever and never see them again. This fills me with grief. Rather than have you with me to the last, I wish you to go now and carry the news of my death and pray for my afterlife. In other words, he charges her with responsibilities both for his worldly reputation and for his afterworldly welfare. She obeys. This version 2 says she cast off her armor and dressed in a simple robe went out. So again, here too it's important that she gets rid of her armor. She has to be dressed as a woman again in order to escape the battlefield alive. So let's take another look at our painting and ask ourselves again what we're seeing. So we know a little bit more now. We see Tomoe killing Moroshige, or is it Saburo? Depending on which version of the story, it could be, might have a different name. This painting, we think, was most likely part of a larger piece originally. Perhaps in the parts that are now missing, there might have been clues that would tell us whether the painter is thinking of the Tale of the Heike version, where she kills Moroshige after being sent away, or the Rise and Fall version, where she kills Saburo before being sent away. I'm not sure it really matters. The killing the enemy seems to be what the painter is really interested in. But there's a little bit more to notice. We're seeing her without a helmet. It's a detail, but I think it's an interesting detail. Her opponent is wearing a helmet, as one might expect from warriors on the battlefield. In both old versions of the tale that I've mentioned, Tomoe is wearing a helmet, at least at first. In the Tale of the Heike, she's wearing one up until after she's killed Moroshige, when she takes it off. In the Rise and Fall, she wears a helmet in her first skirmishes, then we're told she takes it off to reveal her hair, and replaces it with something described as a shiro ichiide kasa, a white beaten kasa. A kasa, in general, is a flattened conical hat, sort of like that. And sometimes they were worn by soldiers, but nobody seems to know precisely what an ichiide kasa would be, or a shiro ichiide kasa. You look it up in the dictionaries, and this seems to be the first and perhaps only mention of one in the tradition. So it says, what was an ichiide kasa? It's what Tomoe put on. In any case, it's not what she's wearing in this picture, because we know what she's wearing in the picture. This is identifiable. She is wearing something called a nashi-uchi eboshi. An eboshi, which we could translate perhaps as crow cap, was a general class of men's hats. And nashi-uchi may originally have meant that this type was softened. It was probably originally nayashi-uchi, so it was beaten until it was soft. To distinguish it from other kinds of eboshi, many of which were lacquered and therefore stiffened. But it came to be written with characters that meant paired, which doesn't really mean anything. But it's a nice colorful phrase, so I'll use it. In any case, the pear-beaten crow cap was worn by samurai. We can see a warrior wearing one here. In in the 13th century scrolls of the Mongol invasions. He's not on the battlefield, he's sitting sort of by the side of the battlefield after the battle, but he's still in armor. Originally it seems that these were soft caps worn under helmets. Later they were lacquered and sometimes worn in lieu of helmets, or more likely sort of beside the battlefield. And as the recent samurai armor show at the Portland Art Museum showed, occasionally helmets themselves were made in the shape of them. So this is, it looks like it's a soft cap, but in fact it's a big heavy piece of iron made to look like a soft cap. Droll fellows, those samurai. In any case, it's not strange to see a samurai wearing them. That's the point. It's not strange to see a samurai wearing one of these, but then again, it's not mentioned in either of the old texts that this is what she was wearing. Whereas both old texts that we're dealing with do mention that she had a helmet, and one says that she changes it for something not quite a helmet, but that still probably provided more protection than a simple hat, no matter how stiffened it had been applied. Again, it may seem like a minor point, but I think it's significant because when she takes off her helmet, she's revealing herself as a woman, beginning the process of returning to womanhood that will be completed when she takes off her armor and puts on a robe to escape the battlefield. In the tale of the Heike, she doesn't make this revelation. That is, she doesn't take off her helmet until after the battle, depicted in Walley. In the Rise and Fall version, she makes the revelation, taking off her helmet before the battle, depicted in our painting. But she replaces it with something that does not look like this. So this painting doesn't correspond perfectly to either of the main ancient accounts of Tomoe's exploits. And depending on how you look at it, it may be conflating two moments into one, showing us a job of slaughter that she did while still in the guise of a man, while also showing us the long hair that reveals her as a woman. None of this, however, really explains why she's wearing a hair-beaten hat. But in fact, it seems to have been an early modern convention to depict Tomoe in such a hat, even when the warriors around her are wearing helmets. The Tokyo National Museum owns a painting of Tomoe by 18th century Osaka artist Shinomi Kominz that shows her in the same hat. She's alone in this painting, of course, but we can also see her wearing the same Nashiuchi eboshi in this mid-19th century print by Kunisada, where she's surrounded by male warriors. They're sort of beneath the horse, wearing helmets. She's not always pictured wearing this hat, of course. In the tale of the Heike picture scroll by Tosa Sasuke in the collection of the Hayashiwara Museum, she's depicted bareheaded. Since this scroll is from the beginning of the Edo period and is thought to have been based on an older model that's now lost, it seems to represent an older narrative pictorial tradition. And in that sense, it's interesting to note that the shape of her face and hair here recall medieval depictions of court ladies, such as in the 12th century tale of Genji. It's almost as if this court lady has put on armor and gotten on a horse. The choice to portray her bareheaded here is an obvious one, since with her helmet on, she would have been indistinguishable, or virtually indistinguishable, from the warriors around her. But it also allows the painter to emphasize her beauty by assimilating her into the tradition of depictions of court ladies. And indeed, the tales do emphasize her beauty as well as her brawn. But the painter has done this at the expense of fidelity to the story, because she should be wearing something on her head a little more protective than this as she stands. Our painting, like the Tokyo National Museum one, does not follow this medieval model. It reflects what I suspect is a more early modern iconography of Tomoe, one that might have been meant as a compromise between the narrative requirement that she be wearing some sort of battle-appropriate headgear and the aesthetic requirement that her all-important long hair be revealed. The Nashiuchi eboshi does both. It's appropriate garb for a warrior, but it also shows her hair. But it does one other thing. The pear-beaten hat was permissible, as I say, for pictorializations of samurai, but it seems to be utterly standard headgear for samurai on the Edo stage. In the exhibit, we have a good example of this in Tsukio Kogyo's print of the play Ikari Kazuki, showing the last moments of Taira warrior Tomomori here. And his charges, the child emperor and Heike puppet Antoku, and his grandmother, known as the nun of second rank. Tomomori's headgear here is a Nashiuchi eboshi, tied with a white sash, just like the one Tomoe is wearing in our painting. We could compare this with another play featuring Tomomori, Kunabenke, where Tomomori's vengeful ghost appears. Here we can just see at the top of his head the decorations normally attached to a helmet, but the helmet itself is foregone in favor of the wild, disheveled hair associated with angry spirits. The point is that the normal warrior's helmet is seldom, if ever, seen on the Edo stage. Tomoe is no exception. The Nashiuchi eboshi is a standard part of her costume in the second half of her no play, when she comes out dressed as a warrior. We can see this in Kogyo's printed play, and we can see it in photos of the play in performance today. And at the end of the play, the hat is even mentioned in the text. As she prepares to leave the battlefield, we're told that with calm heart she lays down her armor and likewise doffs her hair-beaten hat. I'll come out and say it. I think that by showing us Tomoe on the battlefield in the pear-beaten hat, the artist is showing us the Tomoe we know from the stage. As I'll explain later, there are other details to bolster this expression. It's not all about this dark hat, but the hat is important, and I do suspect that she is wearing the hat on this battlefield because she wears the hat on the no stage. And anyway, that's kind of just displacing the question. Why does she wear the hat on the no stage? It may seem that I've already answered that. As I've noted, most warriors on the no stage wear this hat, but I actually think it's a little more complicated than that in the case of Tomoe, which means that we need to turn our attention to the no play itself. Like many no plays, Tomoe's is a ghost story. A wandering monk meets a young woman. The monk says he's from Kiso, and the woman says that Yoshinaka, also of course from Kiso, is enshrined with this place. They both pray, and as the sun sets, the woman fades away. It turns out she was a ghost. The monk falls asleep. The woman re-enters in either the monk's dream or his vision. It's a little bit unclear which. Now she's dressed in the stylized no version of a warrior's garb, sword and halberd, man's overrobe and trousers, and the hat. The monk remarks, "O vision most strange, to the wayfarer's pillow on Awazu plain comes the woman last seen, but now clad in armor, a strange sight indeed." The ghost identifies herself as Tomoe, doomed to wander the earth as a ghost because she's bitter about Yoshinaka having sent her away at the last moment for being a woman. Ghosts in No are ghosts for a reason, some unresolved emotional attachment left over from life, and this is hers. Then comes the haunting high point of the play as the ghost of Tomoe reenacts, alone on the stage, Yoshinaka's last moments and her own actions at the time. And here we get what is in fact a third version of their partner. She says, "I accompanied him to this pine grove and said, 'Quickly kill yourself, Tomoe too, moreover, shall die.' But what Yoshinaka then said was, 'You are a woman. You must have means of sneaking away. Take this amulet, this robe to Kiso.'" In other words, here, in Tomoe's telling, Yoshinaka is sending her away not because he's ashamed to die with a woman, although that reason may be there unspoken, but because she can escape, and he can't. He wants her to live. No doubt he wants to live too, and knows that if she appears as a woman, she'll be able to. Then comes the battle scene. And again, she's alone on stage, the actor's alone on stage, but she reenacts for us, he, and guys of her, reenacts for us the climactic battle scene. And here it's not a single foe that she defeats with her vice-like grip, but a multitude she defeats with her halberd. And then, after Yoshinaka has killed himself, she takes the robe and amulet. She takes off her own armor and hat, puts on Yoshinaka's robe and a broad-brimmed hat, also called a kasa, but of a kind that's associated with travelers and or commoners, and leaves the battlefield and the stage. Note again that she changes her hat. She takes off her warrior-appropriate hat, a dead giveaway on the battlefield, and puts on one worn by travelers and or commoners, i.e. civilians. The fact that she's wearing Yoshinaka's robe doesn't necessarily mean that she's not appearing as a woman. It's a kosore that he gives her, a type of robe that could be worn by either men or women. And in the play, it is a bit hard to tell exactly what she's supposed to look like at this point. Depending on the performance tradition, she may actually change her robe and hat at this point, or she may not. She may simply pick up the robe and narrate the change, leaving audiences to imagine. The audience's imagination is in fact the key here, because we're being asked to imagine a number of layers of transformation. The most basic, of course, is the theatrical transformation. We're supposed to imagine this elaborately fleshed and masked male performer is in fact the insubstantial ghost of a woman. But beyond that, of course, we're supposed to imagine that this woman is in fact caparisoned as a man. As a warrior, she's supposed to present to us a strange sight. And then, if a particular performance we're watching does not actually show the costume change, but only narrates it, then we're supposed to imagine that this woman disguised as a man is now re-disguising herself as a woman. But perhaps not. As University of Oregon's own Stephen Brown has pointed out in his research on this play, when the ghost dons the robe at the end of the play, even if the act is only narrated and not performed, she's donning a robe that has been explicitly associated with Yoshinaka. As a mere robe, it could be unisex, And it's one that he was carrying but not wearing at the time of his death, but we're told very specifically that it's his. And so what is she doing when she puts it on? If this weren't the no, but a more straightforward kind of narrative, we'd say that she's just disguising herself, going incognito. But this is the no, and we have at least two very famous examples from other no plays of women putting on robes given to them by men. In Matsukaze, Pining Wind, we meet two sisters living on a lonely stretch of seacoast, pining for Yukihira, a man from the capital who had lived among them, loved them, and left. As a memento, he left a robe and a hat. In the play, as her longing for Yukihira reaches the highest pitch, one of the sisters, Matsukaze, puts the robe and hat on. As soon as she does, she thinks she sees Yukihira come back. "Oh, what happiness," she says. "Yukihira is standing there calling my name, Pining Wind. I am going to him." Her sister, not quite so far gone, points out that Yukihira is not there. Matsukaze is talking to a pine tree. And we realize with a chill that Matsukaze's desire has driven her mad. An even more arresting transformation happens in Izutsu, the Welcome. This play, too, deals with female longing for an absent lover. In this case, it's one woman, known only as the daughter of Aritsune. And the man she longs for is Narihira, not coincidentally the brother of Yukihira from Pining Wind. Narihira, too, has left the woman a robe and a hat to remember him by. She, too, puts them on and thereafter sees with the eyes of madness. She looks into a well, and in the water sees a reflection, but it's not hers. Just as he looked, the man of old, his robe and headdress, concealed a woman showing a man. Narihira there before me, and so dear, I see myself, yet I still love him, a parted lover, in phantom form. So both of these plays feature women who, mad with longing, see their absent lovers, one in a pine tree, and the other in her own reflection. But this is the note. Ghosts appear to the naked eye. It's no surprise to learn that certain interpretations of these plays suggest that these women aren't so much mad as possessed, that they see their absent lovers because those lovers have, in some spectral form, become present. The woman in Izutsu sees her lover's face in her own because she has, either psychologically or metaphysically, become him. It's not necessarily the case that this is what's happening to Tomoe, but it is what usually happens in a no play when a woman puts on a robe left her by a man she cares about. And after all, her miming and recitation of Yoshinaka's death include his actions as well as hers. And as Professor Brown has noted, in many versions of the text, the woman who appears to the monk in the first half of the Tomoe play is identified as a priestess of the shrine to Yoshinaka. So not just some random woman, but a priestess. And that is a role in traditional religion that lent itself to spirituality. So it's not too much of a stretch to imagine Tomoe as somehow becoming Yoshinaka here at the end of the play. At the very least, we can say that to our imagination, the imagination trained by the no theater, Tomoe appears like a man while she wears the pear-beaten hat, and then when she takes it off and changes her robe, she appears as a man, if only fleetingly, even while we understand that she's trying to appear as a woman so that she can escape the battle. What I'm saying here is that there's a curious double vision going on in the second half of the play. We're seeing Tomoe as two opposing things at once, samurai and men, Tomoe and Yoshinaka. But I think there's a third, and for this, again, I'm going to draw on Stephen Brown's work. But first I'll say one more thing about this pesky hat, and that's that we actually see a number of women wearing it, or one much like it, on the no stage. We have two examples of this in the exhibit, again, imprints by Tsukiyoka Kogo. One is in the print depicting Kakumon, a play in which a man finds a boy orphaned near a temple and takes him in. Years later, he takes the boy to a festival where a woman named Kakumon, driven mad by grief over the death of her husband and loss of her son, appears and dances. The boy recognizes her as his mother, and they are reunited. Here we see the boy standing somewhat stoically before the dancer, who is wearing what is now familiar to us as a man's hat. The other example is in the print depicting the play Futari Shizuka, or the Two Shizukas. This play focuses on a dancer named Shizuka, the abandoned lover of warrior Minamoto no Yoshitsune, the younger brother of Yoritomo, and the one who actually led the army that drove Yoshinaka out of Kyoto. In the play, Shizuka's ghost possesses a woman who retrieves Shizuka's dance costume from a storehouse. Then Shizuka's ghost itself appears, and the two dance. As we can see, both ghostly manifestations of Shizuka are wearing the hat. Matsukaze and Aritsune's daughter both wear man's hats because they have been given them as mementos. This is not the case with Kakumon and Shizuka. They wear men's hats, and indeed men's robes, because of their profession. They're both dancers of the type known as shirabyoshi. The common figure in medieval legends, the shirabyoshi drew attention not just through their dancing, but because they dressed as men to do it. Men's robes, men's hats. This may sound sensational, and perhaps in the beginning it was, just as the earliest performances of what would become known as kabuki were sensational, not to say scandalous, gender-bending dances. But in time, just like kabuki, the shirabyoshi became highly respected professionally. Their costume, however, at least as preserved in the many no plays that featured them, remained that of men. So, just as tomoe as a woman in armor was unique on the battlefield, tomoe as a woman on the stage, dressed as a man, who is neither mad/possessed nor a dancer, is unique. But not if she's on some level channeling Yoshinaka, and not if she's somehow connected with shirabyoshi. Yes, it has been proposed, and here, again, I'm drawing on Stephen Brown. It has been proposed that on some level, tomoe is or can be seen as a shirabyoshi dancer. There are some suggestions in the legendarium that tomoe became a dancer after she left Yoshinaka, and the reason we know how Yoshinaka died is because tomoe spread the tale through her performances. Or perhaps the name tomoe was adopted by shirabyoshi after her, who might have specialized in tales about this. Brown makes the intriguing suggestion, in fact, that the title traditionally appended to tomoe's name, gozen, that is to say, today she's universally known as tomoe gozen, is actually evidence of a shirabyoshi connection. The term gozen was originally a respectful term for important people of all kinds, meaning perhaps something like august presence. And in fact, it's used this way in the no play, but not about tomoe, about Yoshinaka. Later, the title came to be customarily attached to shirabyoshi. Shizuka is always called Shizuka gozen, and there are many other examples. Tomoe is not usually thought of as a shirabyoshi, but Brown suggests that her traditional appellation, which again does not occur in 14th century sources, but only later ones, is evidence that over the centuries she was becoming conflated with the dancer figure. What I'm trying to get at is simply that it's always been impossible to look at this singular figure of tomoe and not see double. She's a character without a genre, sui generis, and so viewers again and again try to recuperate her into existing genres. In the picture scroll, they're recuperating her into the idea of the elegant court lady. If she's a female character on the no stage dressed like a man, then we want to see her as a shirabyoshi. Even just to call her a woman warrior is to invoke two mutually exclusive categories. And that double vision is precisely what this painting, to return to my subject, gives us. It's a picture of tomoe on the battlefield. But it's also a picture of tomoe as the no play gives her to us. I think that the hat is the first clue, but not the only one. Notice also the expression on her face and her pale complexion. Certainly not out of place on a court beauty, but also not unlike the mask used to play her on stage. And notice the curious way the flesh color of her face turns white at her brow. Now this could just be discoloration due to some chemical factor of which I'm unaware, but I prefer to think of it as reminding me of the way a no mask separates the face of a character from the rest of the head. Could be accident, but I don't want it. Notice, of course, the towering pine tree behind her. Of course, many battlefields might have boasted pine trees. It could just be a natural piece of scenery, but all no stages have pine trees. Notice the textile on which the painting is mounted. This circular design is called a tomoe. That is, tomoe's name means this symbol. We don't know when this painting was last mounted, but whoever chose this textile obviously did so because this design jives with the name of the character. But it could also be a no reference. This needs to be further researched and documented, but a Japanese textile conservator who frequently works with the JSMA has expressed the opinion that this textile could be an old no robe, repurposed as a scroll mount, and this kind of thing was often done. And indeed, this design, it's called a tomoe whether it has 3 lobes or 2, is sometimes, not always, but sometimes used in robes for the play itself, as one might expect. So what I'm arguing is that our painter has adopted iconography from the stage. In fact, he was not the only artist to do so. We could return to the Shitomi Kangetsu tomoe from the Tokyo National Museum. And we could observe that not only is she wearing the same hat as the no character, but using the same weapon, a halberd. In some contexts, it's said that the halberd was a more appropriate weapon for a woman, but in the medieval period, this was not necessarily so. And indeed, on the no stage, male warriors frequently used the halberd. We've already seen an example with Tomomori and Funamenki. So the decision to arm the stage tomoe with a halberd is probably less a nod to her gender then another moved to assimilate her into the typical no depiction of a warrior. But it was a departure from the legends, wherein she fights with bow and arrow, sword and fist, but not halberd. And yet Kangetsuya arms his Tomoe with a halberd, and he was not alone in doing so. Poking around the web, I've found 2 other paintings of Tomoe, both anonymous and undated, and I can't even tell who owns them, whose compositions are strikingly similar to ours. Both dress her in the pear-beaten hat, and one includes not only the pine tree, but a halberd discarded on the ground beneath it. Our Tomoe painting, then, is part of a larger early modern process of amalgamating the Tomoe written of in the epics with the Tomoe presented on stage. Warrior paintings were a popular genre in the medieval and early modern period. Heroic stories of samurai were perennially popular among the townsmen, and as one can easily imagine, samurai patrons as well liked to display images of their noble forebears as inspiration for their offspring, if not for their own enjoyment. No doubt this painting was originally created for just such a purpose. But it's not just showing us Tomoe on the battlefield, it's showing us Tomoe on the battlefield as evoked by Tomoe on stage. The Tomoe battlefield scene we might imagine if we were in the audience watching the No play, hearing the battle described by the ghost of its survivor. The battlefield scene we might imagine if we'd been raised on a steady diet of no, if no, more than the medieval epics or histories, were how we learned about the past. So thank you very much. That's the end. We're going to hold questions until the end, and we're just going to move right into our second speaker. I'll get all introduced to him, but first let's make sure you know him. Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Alan Pate. Alan Pate is one of the foremost experts in the West in Japanese dolls and puppets. And after you hear his talk today, I'm sure you'll have no doubt about the importance of Japanese culture. Alan has an MA in Korean history and language from Harvard University, but since 1993 has been a dealer specializing in Japanese dolls. He's currently based in St. Ignatius, Montana. He's the author of 2 books from Taro, Ningyo, The Art of the Japanese Doll, and Japanese Dolls, The Fascinating World of Ningyo. He's also the author of a museum catalog from the Morikami Museum about theatrical puppets entitled Entertaining the Gods of Man, Japanese Dolls in the Theater. And has also produced dolls on Kokeshi and on the Neko. And I should add that it was Alan who helped arrange the loan, or who arranged the loan, and helped install the 3 Bunraku puppets that are on display right now upstairs in the large pregnant gallery. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Alan and welcome him to the University.
I'm really pleased to be here today. Actually, I've visited the JSMA a few times. They've been kind enough to invite me again, which is scary in and of itself, because they happen to be home to one of the Japanese friendship dolls, which is a work that I'm pursuing at this point in time. But they've asked me to pull out something from work that I've done previously regarding Japanese dolls and the theater, which for me is a very interesting confluence of 2 aspects of Japanese culture. The theatrical aspect is a lot of, well, pardon the pun, play. It gives a lot of focus. It's studied, many works done on many of the aspects. Ningyo, human figure or doll, is an aspect of Japanese culture that doesn't get as much focus, discussion, particularly in the West, where the word doll is technically and figuratively a 4-letter word, seen as something diminutive, childish, for young girls or even worse, women, and not something that one should study in any kind of academic way. And to a certain degree, that holds true in Japan. There are not that many in academia who focus on Ningyo, looking into its historical roots, looking into evolution, change, meaning, and how those meanings sort of fray out and show up in other aspects of Japanese culture. And so this is sort of the world that I have found myself delightfully enmeshed with and obsessed with since about 1993. And so part of this is a discussion of ningyo, or dolls as they show up in a theatrical context, and part of it is just sort of a romp through ningyo and to help sort of inculcate or to help reveal a little bit of its importance in Japanese culture as a whole. But when we're talking about Japanese theater, frequently performers, even today, trace their sort of metaphysical or spiritual origins to mythological performance of Ame no Uzume, in sort of doing her dance to entice the sun goddess Amaterasu to come out of her cave where she's hidden herself away. Now this painting's a little bit chaste. Frequently this dance is described as ribald, and in this painting she's missing what I like to call the hubba hubba factor. I didn't know what my audience might be, so I chose something a little bit more discreet. Historically though, when we turn into ningyo, we're looking at a tradition that can be traced back to 13,000 BC. So this is a long-lived aspect of Japanese culture. So of course, in the earliest days, this dogu, or from the Jomon period, used very much for ritual purposes, clay, simplistic though modernistic, and a lot of people have looked at these and saw spacemen and other various questionable visions. But the idea is that from the very earliest origins of Japanese culture, we find ningyo, we find doll forms embedded, woof and weft, into the culture. And as we move forward, you can trace them linearly. I mean, a non-stop direct connectivity from 13,000 BC to today, which is a very interesting point in and of itself, that you have an object within culture, shifting, changing, yet consistent for millennia, which to me makes you think that, well, maybe we should pay a little bit more closer attention to what these are, what they mean. Here you're seeing an abagatsu, ningyo, and a very simple T-shaped form that would have been placed at a child's bedside. It would have been part of the birthing chamber, the ubuya, when a child was born, to protect the child, to attract evil, potentially malevolent elements into the doll, therefore protecting the child. These dolls have morphed and changed, as I said, over time to its more possibly recognizable manifestation, the Girls' Day Hina Matsuri celebration, depicting a sort of a stylized imperial court. But what most people today don't realize is that the dairibin, or the two figures up top, actually represent a shintai, or an idea where the spirits were supposed to come in and literally inhabit the doll during the course of the festival, protecting and purifying the household for the years to come. And this sort of spiritual aspect, protective aspect, talismanic aspect is glossed over when Japan opened to the West. This kind of juju was not really appreciated, and so there was a downplaying of meaning in popular lore and in public discourse, to where it was described as a scene in which young girls are inculcated into etiquette, to serve tea and this kind of thing, totally skipping over a very, very core function, which was this purification and talismanic kind of aspect. Also true for the Boys' Day celebration on May 5th, much more downplayed, particularly after the war, but a very long-standing tradition within Japanese culture, where dolls depicting figures from, historical figures from the military genre were brought out. And this ties very much into Glynne's talk, in that this is Minamoto no Yoshitsune, and you have an appeasement of goryo, or spirits who died unjustly. And so similarly, these dolls served as temporary residing places for the spirits during the course of the holiday, or festival, or however you want to describe it. Other aspects where dolls come into play in maybe unexpected ways. Ningyo were designed to protect children from measles and smallpox. That was a very rampant communicable disease and greatly feared. And so a doll form was developed, typically in red, because the hosogami was seen as being the demon or of measles and smallpox was seen as being attracted to the red color. So dolls in red would be placed near a child's bedside. Here you can see the poor infant suffering from measles or smallpox. And the hosogami would be attracted, in theory, from the child into the doll and there to help facilitate healing. Not a function normally ascribed to a Barbie or to either Ping-Pong Generation Cabbage Patch doll. Unless we think that these are ideas of the past, no longer relevant. Ningyo today, if you go during the Hinamatsuri season to Awashima Jinja and Wakayama-ken, and I highly recommend you do make the journey, it's a little bit out there, but beginning in the fall, they establish a burning pyre where people bring in their ningyo, no longer wanted, no longer needed, no longer understood how to store them, those kinds of things, spatial considerations, and they are burned. They are put in a burning pyre beginning in the fall, and that pyre burns 24/7 until the spring, and then they ritually load up onto small boats, hina ningyo, which are then ritually set out to sea as a nagashi bina, or symbolic sort of a release or a purging of evil elements and malevolent elements. And so this shows that even today in Japanese culture, ningyo read differently than what we read dolls. And so when you bring this kind of concept of dolls having this sort of underlying power, underlying meaning, underlying function, and you bring that together with theater, and theater having origins in ritualistic elements, you know, from No and from shrine dances and whatnot, it, for me, presents a fairly dynamic duo that I think is very fun to explore. I looked at some of the, or showed you some of the archaeological elements, the dogu records, though, documenting the evolution of puppet drama or performance using ningyo is a little bit more hunt and peck, not so consistent. And so we have gaps in time, we have certain assumptions, we look at traditions living today and sort of move backward and say, well, this has evolved over time. And so in this, we have sort of a bifurcated kind of approach. We have ningyo serving in drama, ritualized performance associated with shrine and ritual. And then we have a development of ningyo used in more secular performances. And so I'm going to sort of two-track here now, shooting down the more religious vein. The secular vein. The first, or the most often cited document recording itinerant puppet players comes from this, the Karai Shiki, and from a Kyoto courtier from the 12th century. And it's an interesting document. It's fragmentary, but in this one section, it speaks very much of this. Others make peachwood dolls dance, fight, and generally imitate the actions of human beings. Now, when I first came to start studying ningyo and would spend time in Japan, and I would haunt various museums and talk to people, the number one question was, in America, have I found any peachwood dolls? Have I found peachwood dolls? Now, the doll on the left is not peachwood. It's sort of trying to find a head that looked peachwood-esque, whatever that might be. This is from the Edo Tokyo Art Museum. This is just actually a Musha ningyo head, so not out of peachwood. But there seems to still be, you know, even though we're many centuries down the road, a lingering fascination with this concept of these early peachwood dolls. And Oe Masafusa goes on to describe that not only did they perform dances with the dolls and in like combat and that type of thing, but that also the women rouged their lips and whited their cheeks and rolled their hips and had other functions as well. And so they describe an itinerant community of living very much on the fringes of society, engaged in puppet play and prostitution. And it serves as somewhat of a template, because even today, even though the raku and the various puppet forms are very well respected, there's still a sense of an outsiderness that they, in many interviews, they reflect upon. And it stems back from these very early documents, where you have the sense of foreigners, largely from the Korean aspect of the continent, coming in, performing with puppets, and traveling around and performing and various guises. As this moves forward in time, you find this most frequently manifested in what are known as ebisukaki or ebisumawashi, and frequently these were itinerant public performance loosely affiliated with the Nishinomiya shrine in Osaka, specifically the Ebisu shrine in Osaka, although there was a great deal of tension as to whether they were honor-bound to do the will of Nishinomiya or whether they were independent. But they were itinerant. They traveled around and they did performances, very small. I mean, we're talking modest in scale and in scope, but fascinating and long-lived performances. Painting and woodblock prints and various other documents have this with great consistency going from the 1500s all the way up to the mid-1800s, and with very little change in costume and that type of thing. But the performances were both entertainment but also ritually based. The Ebisu shrine at Nishinomiya was the center of Ebisu worship. Again, another foreign deity. Ebisu largely, as the name implies, a foreign derivation. And today you see him, frequently paired with daikoku, with fat earlobes and a fish, a happy red tie tucked under his arm, and he's one of the household gods of daily provision. But historically, he was seen as a god to contend with and one that needed to be placated. And over time, the use of puppets and dolls were closely associated with this placation. And Ebisu puppetry was a very powerful form. It was used to help not only in fishing communities, but also to ensure success in crops, and became the center of this worship or this performance tradition was in Awaji. And so the Awaji puppet tradition, very, very strong, frequently centered on Ebisu. And these are non-textual based, largely non-textual based performances. They bring in contemporary issues related to the village, talking about what, if it's in a fishing village, what kind of catch, what kind of fish they're looking for. It gets woven into this drama. There's a certain pattern, a certain rhythm, a certain form to it, but a lot of ad-libbing, a lot of bringing in the contemporary element. So unlike the Ningyo Jodori or the Buraku traditions we'll talk about in a minute, which is very much text-based and very focused on the text, and the value for many people is in the text. For these more folk forms, it's more ritual-based, much more free-form, and in my respect, or my perspective, much more intimate and much more powerful and resonant. And so here we see moving, this is a mid 1700s print, 1800s print, showing an Ebisu Mawashi, and the puppet that he's operating there is a sambaso. And the sambaso tradition, ritual dance tradition, you find it in No, you find it in Kabuki, you find it in Awaji or these Ebisukaki itinerant puppeteer traditions, and then you also find it very strongly in Bunraku as well. And here's a 1950s photograph of Yoshida Eiza, who was considered one of the preeminent mid-19th century puppeteers, performing a sambaso with a puppet that's very, very similar to the one that's upstairs in the rotation. When you go up, you'll see this Ningyo upstairs. And there is a sort of a codified element that you find with these puppets for easy identification, with the 13 stripes on the hat, the auspicious symbols on the robe, the crane, the tortoise and pine tree, and then the Suzu rattle, which is down there in the right. But again, and we'll discuss this in a little bit, it's just that these puppets, though, when you photograph them in the still, have beauty. You can see the technique, admire certain skills and craftsmanship, but when they are in the hands of a skillful operator, they literally come to life, and you can understand why they could be seen as such a powerful intermediary for itinerant puppeteers to use to practice their rituals. And you find it in various guises. This is also an Awaji puppet done as a monkey performing the sambaso. And this was quite fun because the eyes extend very far out, and the mouth opens and the tongue pops out, and he's altogether wonderful. The traditions I've just very quickly outlined, are not so much theater-based, thinking of a building, thinking of a fixed locale. They lent themselves very much to the itinerant lifestyle that we first saw with the kibutsu and the karaishi that I mentioned earlier. But a very strong and important trend that happened in puppetry once sort of the Pax Tokugawa took hold, is you begin to find the development of very, very sophisticated forms of theater. But the main attraction is not a human actor, but a doll. And the first to sort of get this up and running, so to speak, was Takeda Omi. And Takeda Omi, his first claim to fame was that he made a clock, a sand clock, and also a zenmai, which is a sort of a, zenmai is actually a spring vegetable, but it has a sort of a coiled element. And Takeda's claim to fame was sort of taking that coil design, but using whale bone and using it as a tight coil and creating a spring mechanism. And you take the spring mechanism and you add it to cogs, you can then create what was known as kabuki, or a mechanical element. And so in thanks and gratitude for this wonderful clock that was presented, he was given the license to open a theater in the Dotonbori section of Osaka, where he could unveil, or he could use and display these trick forms, these karakuri ningyo. And what is just wonderful about this tradition is that we have wonderful documentary evidence done both in the period and shortly thereafter, because people were fascinated by this. This was a very, very successful theatrical endeavor, to where he had not only the first theater, but he opened up a chain of theaters both in Osaka and in Kyoto, and eventually, very short-lived, up in Edo, Tokyo. And I love this print because here you have Takeda very, proudly introducing what is, in essence, an ebisu kaki. So this is an ebisu mawashi, one of these itinerant performing doll operators in the form of a doll. That sort of double reasoning is if I'm right. The weasel is that you see there was a common ending or a common component of the ebisu mawashi. And in some of the larger karakuri forms, the weasel flies off into the audience and that kind of thing. And so here's Takeda presenting an ebisu mawashi. Frequently, the dolls done were of simple in the sense that they were designed to deceive the public. Simple trick dolls, one trick dolls actually. So here you have neck wrestling, which is a very popular sport in Edo, Japan. And so volunteers from the audience were asked to come up and to sort of pit their skills and strength against a doll. And they think, oh sure, how difficult would this be? What they don't know is the neck of the doll extends through the stage floor and is anchored down below. And there is absolutely no way that they'd ever be able to defeat the doll, but it was a winning combo for many, many years. Other sort of fun little sleights of hand and things that they did was you had a fortune-telling doll which would tell fortunes and then prizes would be won. So here he's pointing his fan at Hote, and then the lucky winner in the crowd is holding a Hote ninjo. And so simple. But as time progressed, well, actually this was also a fun one. You have a little boy standing there with a certain amount of coaxing. He lifts up his kimono and then urinates into a bowl. How fun is that? But the idea is that at first, Takeda could get away, Takeda Omi and his now successors could get away with relatively simplistic, relatively, as I said, one-trick ponies that delighted the audience and they came back again and again and again. But simultaneously, you have the rise of other theatrical forms. Kabuki is getting its feet under itself and developing into a more engaging art form rather than just dances by the riverbed. And then also, as we'll talk about in a minute, you have bunraku, or ninjo joruri, which is beginning to develop and provide competition. So as time went on, Takeda and his crew had to up the game. And so ultimately, in its more sophisticated form, he was able to create contraptions that were imitating no plays. So you have Takasago on the left, the Jonuba under the pine sweeping up needles. And then you have Shiokumi, the salt maiden, on the right. But what's interesting is this is a playbill. This is a literal, an actual playbill from Takeda Theater, which shows the number of operators that were required to enact this simple thing. So as time goes on, largely in terms of to meet competition, they really had to sort of step it up, as they said. But ultimately, it was a losing battle. The Takeda Empire began to implode financially first, and there was political scandal where Takeda Omi III was arrested with a certain amount of money in the presence of the sheriff, and theaters burned, and ultimately you had a collapse, almost total collapse of the Takeda Empire in the 1770s. But you had a lot of skills, you had a lot of entrepreneurial oomph, and so the Takeda family sort of splintered off. A certain group went to Nagoya, where they became famous for making the kabuki ningyo that you find on the festival carts that you'll see in various aspects of Japan. And the Takeda family was the preeminent kabuki ningyo manufacturer for the daishi, the carts, festival carts. Another branch moved up to Edo, where they became involved with the very active misemono exhibitions that were developing in the early 1800s in Edo, part of which had to deal with doll displays. The Takeda family would bring in mechanical elements, but they were having to compete with hyper-realistic carvings, including pieces such as this. And yes, this actually is a doll, life-size doll. And so you have a sort of a diminution, you have a fracturing of the Takeda Empire, but it continued on in other guises. Turning to a more germane topic here with bunraku, is today we call it bunraku, but historically it was known more as ningyo joruri, joruri being a chanted form of narration. And again, we start moving into, immediately we're dealing with a storyline, a focus on story. This is a 1690 print from the Yamamoto Tosanojo's theater, and it begins to give us a sense of the elements that were coming together to form what ultimately became a very, very powerful entertainment kind of aspect or element for ningyo. Joruri itself as a term, briefly, refers to a tale that was told about Princess Joruri, and again ties into some of what Glynne was talking about earlier with the Heike, where you have young Yoshitsune fleeing to the north, and he comes across, hears a legend, and comes across a garden in which he hears this sort of wonderful music being played, and falls in love with Joruri, the Princess Joruri that's there, and the adventures, I'm trying to think of my time here. All of these stories can be so engaging and in-depth, and you want to massage each one because they're wonderful details and to understand why they had resonance and that kind of thing. But in short, they spend a lovely evening together, and in the morning he is forced to flee to continue his quest because he isn't a man on a mission and doomed to die, as we all know. But he falls sick, and Joruri is summoned, and through her supplication and appeals to the god Hachiman, he is healed, and then he continues on his way, and the two never meet. And this became a very popular tale told by biwa hoshi, or traveling nuns playing the biwa and chanting to create, again, as a ritualized performance drama to appease the goryu, or the angry spirits. But rather than focusing on the military aspects of Yoshitsune's career, it focused on this very intimate detail. And over time, this style of chanted narration became known as joruri, taking her name from Princess Joruri, but in and of itself became the name for the genre as a whole. What we have happening in the 1500s is a joining of this very established chanting performance style with puppetry, right? And so we have this trifecta of elements that come together, and in the center there you see the chanter reading from the text. You have a samisen player here in the middle, and then you have puppeteers operating very simplistic puppets from below, one man, one puppet. And this became ningyo joruri, which today we know as bunraku. Initially, it was text-based, based on joruri, but as its popularity advanced, we started having more text, different texts being introduced. And in Edo, we have a form called kinpira joruri, which has gotten somewhat short shrift because the primary exponent, or the signature sort of chanter for that was Izumi Dairyu. And he was known for his very charged chanting style. And he would wield a 24-inch steel rod and using for his chanting as accompaniment. He was known to become periodically carried away with the drama, and he would wield this iron rod, and woe be to the puppet or the prop that ended up in his way. And that is frequently cited as one of the sources and inspirations for the Aragoto performance style in kabuki. But Kinpira Jori as itself was much more nuanced, much more broad-based than most people are generally familiar with. And it's centered around the tales of Minamoto Raiko and his Shiteno, or his four gods. And this is a much later print by Kuniyoshi showing Minamoto Raiko up there in the upper right with his four guardians there. Usui Sadamitsu, Urabe Suitake, Watanabe no Tsuna, and Sakata Kintoki. And I'm going to focus on him just briefly because Sakata Kintoki, the bad boy, the original bad boy of some of these dramas, just little historical data on him, but his exploits became expounded upon and elaborated on and enlarged to where he truly became a larger-than-life figure. But the brilliance, returning briefly to Uzumi Daido, and his, the scriptwriter, if you will, Oka Seide, was that they took this basic concept, the basic story surrounding the Shiteno, and then they expanded this world, and they added not only talking about Sakata Kintoki, but also his son, Kinpira, and allowing to create, you have a base knowledge of the events around the Shiteno, and then beginning to expand upon it. And this is one of the first aspects where you have this Rensaku no, this linked element, where they're expanding out the worlds that are so clearly set in people's minds. And it became a quite successful formula. And you have Kinpira Doribon, or books that are published about the various stories. And so that you now have an expanding textual base from which the puppet plays are being, they're basing themselves on, both in Kyoto and the Osaka area, as well as Edo. Even though the Edo side got the most play, the Kinpira Jori was happening in both points of the compass there. And so this is Jori Bon, featuring Kinpira, and Kinpira Kesho Mondo, and I haven't been able to track down the story specifically, but it's Kinpira and the cosmetic shapeshifter debate, which you can only imagine what was going on in there. But where we really have Ningyo Jodori establishing itself and moving into a very high art form is down in Osaka, under largely the brilliance and the energies of Takemoto Gidayu, who's shown here. Gidayu himself was a brilliant chanter, known for being able to fuse some of that energetic element that I talked about with Kinpira Jodori, but with more softer elements, much more nuanced performance. Here he's shown with Tatsumatsu Hachirobe, one of the puppeteers. And again, at this point, we're still dealing with a one-man, one-puppet format. And this is, they're actually performing a play by Chikamatsu Monzaemon, who arguably Japan's greatest playwright, who wrote for both the Ningyo Jodori stage as well as kabuki stage, and responsible for many of the great works of literature to come out of Japan. And this performance in 1705 seems to be showing the dojoji, the bell scene in dojoji, but it's from the Mirror Craftsman of Emperor Yomei in 1705. This, again, fusion of a chanter with skills and a writer with vision, completely unfettered from sticking to the classic traditions, began to expand their world. And this is the dividing line. Prior to this, it's known as Ko Jodori, or Old Jodori, and now it's going to be Shin Jodori. And so all bets are off. They are, in terms of artistic and creative output on a textual level, in the periods the immediate period that ensues, you have masterpieces like Sonzaki Shinju in 1703, Kokusen Yakasen in 1715, Sugawara Denju Tenai Kagami in 1746, Yoshitsune Zen Monzakura in 1747, and Kanadehon Shushingura in 1748. So you have in this very short period of time immense classics and important works being produced, largely for puppets, to be enacted by puppets. Kabuki sing this. There's an interplay between the two, both going back and forth. And even in the early stages, Ningyo Jodori was borrowing from Takeda's katakuri performances, because there's actually a linkage in their actual formation, where you have katakuri elements on stage at the same time as Ningyo, the Muraku performances are going on. This image is from Onahachi no Ki, or the Woman's Potted Dwarf Trees, which is actually a takeoff on a No drama by Seiyami called Hachi no Ki. And the reason I'm using this image is that I've tried to put myself into the mindset of why people got so excited. You see these woodblock prints, largely black and white, and you go through and you're seeing and you're trying to understand what it was that excited, that palpitated, titillated the audiences so much that this was such an exciting form. And for me, it's a little bit difficult to penetrate the world from this remove. And you have these various design elements. In this story, The Woman's Potted Dwarf Trees, these three, here's the three potted dwarf trees. You have Lord Tokiyori, disguised as a monk, seated here, visiting a former retainer, Tsuneo Genzaimo, standing here in the middle of winter. And at first, and following the Seiyami play, first the monk, the disguised monk, his admittance is rebuffed because Tsuneo's wife is alone and it's not appropriate to invite the monk in. The monk is sent away in a snowstorm, returns when Tsuneo is present, and after some, like, oh, I can't possibly receive you, my home is too humble, he's gained admittance, but since it's winter, to keep his guests warm, he sacrifices his three potted trees, burns them to keep the monk warm. And as the play continues, it turns out that the identity is revealed, and his gesture of burning the trees and whatnot endears him all the more, and I'm condensing the drama line there. But the reason to bring this up is that when you see this, there's a wonderful painting in Freer done by Okumura, attributed to Okumura Masanobu, of this same play. Now when I see this, when you see this in person, you kind of go, oh, all right, the colors, these elements are so strong and so profound that you can see that not only was there the beauty of the drama, not only was there the magic of the words and the stories being told, but you were transported to a world that was just really magical. And as you dissect or parcel out the elements of the design, here are three potted trees again. Tsuneo's suit of armor, bespeaking an earlier nobility, an earlier success in career, and his horse. The stage is just quite rich and lush. And then when you start looking at the puppeteers, and here again, one man, one puppet, but you begin to see how marvelous and transported these were. And then you have your chanters and samisen player on the side, and then you have the introduction, sort of setting the stage, which became sort of standard for all of the production, setting the stage, why it's being done, what the play is being performed, and the final words being Tozai, as let it begin. But as these worlds unfold, you're moving into something that one man, one puppet no longer can contain. And so puppet technology, the actual doll themselves, had to morph and change in order to keep up with the sophistication of the dramas that they were being asked to enact. And so the development of a three-man, one puppet format developed, and whereas before the puppeteer was in plain view, completely in plain view, with a relatively modest puppet that one person can hold, when you started expanding on the size of the puppet, one man can no longer hold it, and therefore you're having to develop this ballet between the three men, but also they are partially obscured by a stage mechanism, which they're only part of their bodies revealed, yet they are clearly on stage. You cannot miss the man in the mask, or the man without mask in this case. But the idea that initially people are suspect that when you go to a Bunraku performance that you might be obsessed or fixated on the fact that there's these three, just ignore the man behind the curtain kind of idea. But in point of fact, the face, the expression of the lead operator whose face is, he remains relatively neutral, and so therefore little by little you forget them and you move right into the performance itself. The puppets themselves are rudimentary. They're very, very simplistic in construction. There's no need for complicated mechanisms because all the momentum or all the motion is generated by the puppeteers. The lead puppeteer stands on stands on higher clogs to gain the altitude and to operate. the head and the right hand. Secondary puppeteer helps with the body and operates the left hand, and then the sort of the up-and-coming element of the third operator is responsible for the feet. And so in this way, you have the motion and locomotion of the dolls, but when they're viewed on, in all their glorious garb, they become quite convincing. So, Bunshishi, generical. With the expansion and the multiplication of roles, multiplication of plays, it was not possible to develop a head or a body for each one. So you have a sort of stylization or codification of types of roles that evolved over time, where in this role, this is going to be, the young valiant general, or this is going to be the maiden, and the youth, young girl. Female puppets are typically depicted without legs, without feet. This is a young girl, and so she's depicted as a pilgrim, so she actually has legs. But the heads, the kashira, become the focus of actually the work. And as time goes on, it was necessary to develop techniques to convey emotion, to convey all that the playwrights were demanding of the puppets. For female puppets, typically they're reflected emotion neutral. So it literally is up to the puppeteer through action, through a series of codified actions and gestures to convey a wide range of emotions with the same face. This face has to portray happiness, sadness, grief, terror, anger, all of that based on angle, shift, and gesture. And that in and of itself is an astonishing form. Hands, technology evolves to where the hands can also be used to communicate, grasp objects. And so here you can see her left hand and the flexibility. This gives you a sense of the technique. The four fingers joined together, only the thumb loose, and it's allowed, a trigger mechanism in the arm allows the hand to collapse, grab, or to be beautifully expressive. But for the roles that they were being asked to perform, for example, in the opening scenes, the very opening scenes of Kokusen Yakasen, you have a distraught retainer gouging out his own eyes. You have a cesarean operation being performed on a dead princess. These are things that most dolls aren't asked to do. And so you had technological development that had to come. So this is an early print where a puppet maker is showing, or a head maker is showing how the eyes open, the eyes close, the mouth opens, the mouth closes, the eyes shift left to right. And so therefore you begin to have a great deal of more expressiveness that can be brought into the puppets themselves. And so you have this wonderful marriage of the chanter working with these beautiful lyrics. You have the samisen player with this very augmenting music. You have the puppeteer, but then you also have the puppet itself sort of carrying a little bit more of the weight. Transformation heads, where an possible inner element of the character comes to life with a click of a flip of the lever. And, when dolls behave badly, you have to chop off their faces. And so this is a style of doll where a sword blow slips the face right off. Heads for themselves are very difficult to create, become the prized possessions of the troops that operate them. But sadly, and I mean really, really sadly, very little has been done to track the artisans who were responsible for creating them all this time. That's not all that uncommon. The phrase the anonymous craftsman exists for a reason, because the various craftsmen associated with many forms, Japanese art forms, really did not get a focus. People didn't track their biographies, they didn't track their careers. And in my own research into doll makers as recently as 1920s, there's a great deal of unknowns about their biographies. So it's not all that unsurprising that we cannot find much information on the early makers of these heads. This is a photograph of Oe Minosuke, and the Oe lineage is one of the more documented of lineages. Oe Minosuke passed on in 1997, but his lineage from Shikoku dates back to the early 1800s. Another very well-known maker, actually well-documented, because the degrees of his life, or the details of his life are not known, but puppet heads with his stamp exist with some numbers, is Tenguya Hisakichi, who passed on in 1943, who's frequently known as Tengu Hisa. That name you find quite frequently. One of the earlier names is Oishi Genryusai Yoshihiro from the early 1800s, but we don't know much about his life in the Bunraku world. We know about him because he was doing mechanical dolls in Edo, but the documents about him in Edo reference the fact that he began as a head carver in Osaka for the Ningyo Joruri down in the Osaka area. When you go upstairs to the gallery and see the installation dealing with this section of the installation, there are a number of prints by Sekino Junichiro, and that help. I find them wonderful as a wonderful augment to the puppets that are also displayed up there. And here you have a rendition of a theater performance, Bunraku performance. And here an image of Yoshida Bunguro II, who passed on in 1962. It was a tragic loss to the Bunraku community when he passed on. And this is a 1953 photograph of the same Bunguro performing with Kiritaki Manjuro. And again, you see the sort of the neutrality of the faces, no matter how dramatic the action. The job of the puppeteer was not to draw attention to themselves so much, but to sort of immerse themselves and become one with the puppet, and therefore channel everything into the puppet itself rather than reflecting and distracting through facial emotion. This final print is of Kiritaki Manjuro performing in the Love Suicides at Amijima. Another connection that we have with these puppeteers is frequently if they really felt good about a role or responded well to a puppet, they would sort of commemorate the puppet by creating these plaques, and the puppet would be preserved. And so Kiritaki Manjuro used this puppet of Osome in a particular performance of Osome Hisamitsu Shinpan Matsuri. And these are wonderful sort of tie-ins. Because for me, when I approach these things, I'm approaching it from the object. It's the object I fall in love with first. And then it goes out to the theatrical performance that they would be used, and then the operators themselves. And so I find that there's this sort of a channeling of Kiritaki Manjuro when I come across things like that. And then the final print that's upstairs depicts Yoshida Eizo in a scene from the Sugawara and the Secrets of Calligraphy. So finally, just sort of winding down here, the three puppets upstairs can be considered types rather than looking into them as this image or that image, they're types. And this hime, or princess, frequently is referred to as yaegaki type, dealing with a certain performance. But when you get up there, and part of the beauty and part of the attraction for me of Ningyo is the textiles that they employ is just over the top in terms of beauty. Facial rendition is really quite fine. But the kimono that was used, particularly in Bunraku, female puppets, was designed such that so that the back was really quite spectacular and awe-inspiring. There would be even a door toward the back of the stage where the female puppets frequently would exit so that this element would be displayed. And she's just some sun fading on the front, but the back is just absolutely spectacular. And then when you look into the details of this work that it went into it is really quite marvelous. Another type, and again, the details. So, part of the beauty also of Bunraku is it's a living tradition. Continues today, various aspects. Musume Bunraku got its start in 1935, largely when the major players from the Bunraku theater went to Manchuria by order of the Japanese government to perform over there, leaving the Osaka community bereft. And a lot of the traditions which completely prohibited women performing in these roles, those rules began to be broken down, and you have the emergence of Musume Bunraku, or women's Bunraku. And the puppets then tend to be smaller, and so this is a collection of Bunraku puppets for Musume Bunraku, again a 1952 photograph from a private collector. And then you also have Kuruma Bunraku from Hachioji, in which the operator, one man, one puppet, but he operates on a wheel sort of chassis kind of thing that allows him to move around stage and manipulate the puppet without all the complexities and the heaviness of holding these buggers up. And then finally, I was in Kyoto in December and was able to go to, privileged to go to the Kawamise performances when I was in Kyoto. And knowing that this talk was coming up, I saw this poster advertising an upcoming performance of Oshichi at the Fire Tower. and it was featuring Arashi Yoshisato VI, enacting what is in essence a bunraku role. And in the 19th century, mid-19th century, kabuki actors began to incorporate jodori-type maneuvers or positions and elements from the jodori repertoire as part of dance performances. And in here, the idea was the actor would need to keep his face completely still, reflective of the bunraku, particularly on the female roles, and act motions originating from the hands and the elbows as opposed to the shoulders, again imitating the bunraku. And here he's being performing what is a very complicated lift maneuver, where actually his puppeteers are actually physically lifting up the figure and simulating a flight, because at this point she's chanting, how I wish I had wings, how I wish I had wings. I want to fly to him and save him and be with him. And so here's using her arms to begin to lift up. And then here on the left, you have an actual osome, oshichi, bunraku. I love the identical textiles and elements being used. So, and there we go. So, thank you very much.
It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm so glad Glynne is branching into drama. It's wonderful to get new colleagues, and he's going to Yale to really show what he can do amongst the people who are in the field, and it's really great. I look forward to collaborations up and down the I-5 corridor for as long as I'm still at Portland State before I retire. Today's topic is the superstars of Edo, the Ichikawa Danjuro line, and it's very much the whole part of my presentation's whole focus is on the relationship between the printed page, especially the printed page with images, and what's happening on stage. What links these two, in other words, the print industry and the profession and the business of kabuki, is their commercial nature. They are utterly commercial. They exist only because they can make money. They die if they cannot make money in the proto-capitalist economy of the Edo period in Japan. And both of these industries discovered that the best way to make money was to sell stars. That's the best way to make money. This has been what's going on in kabuki and in the print industry is perhaps, and I don't know because I don't know Western European commercial history very well, perhaps one of the earliest examples of a phenomenon that's studied in business schools all over the United States and Japan now. My daughter is taking a seminar in it at Todai as we speak. The practice of branding. What is branding? I'm going to read the definition of branding. Branding is the process involved in creating a unique name and image for a product in the consumer's mind, mainly through advertising campaigns with a consistent theme. Branding aims to establish a significant and differentiated presence in the market that attracts and retains loyal customers. The advertising is done on stage and it's done on the page. And we're going to be looking at how one family chose to be branded, collaborated in branding, and using superstar status, created a brand that would last for centuries in Japan and that brought great wealth and status to the family involved and great wealth to everyone involved, the theater managers, the publishers. So the one family we're going to look at is the Ichikawa Danjuro line, but I want to emphasize that this is not the only family being branded in Edo period Japan. In fact, all of the great onnagata created their own brands, and their brands were sold not only on stage and on the page, but in all sorts of retail establishments. But today, I'll be pressed to give a good account of what's going on with one line, the Ichikawa Danjuro line. Now let's get into the slides and into superstars and stars in Edo Kabuki. First of all, the relationship between commerce and kabuki stardom has not diminished one bit since since the development of modern capitalism. It's been part of kabuki, and it will continue to be part of kabuki, just as, say, Ichikawa Danjo VII made millions, the equivalent of $1 million salary from kabuki, and $3 million or $4 million from his commercial ventures as a brand. So I'm sure that Ichikawa Ebizo makes more money through his commercial ventures than he does with a very large kabuki salary. Interestingly, and even before all of this begins, we have a superstar at the beginning of it all. It's not just kabuki, it's okuni kabuki. So okuni, the lady here, oops, wrong button. The lady here, she's the founder of kabuki. I don't have time at all to go into kabuki history today and say why it is that women were banned from the stage. But the important thing here is that she is playing an androgynous male, and she is dressed. You can see she has the headband of a man. She has the sword of a man. Her outfit is androgynous. There's male and female aspects to it. Her long hair is dressed like a woman. And so she's playing an androgynous, appealing male. And at this time in Japanese history, and actually right up and through till today, this androgynous sexual appeal is part of kabuki. We see other performers on stage. Here's probably a woman playing a woman, but interestingly, she's using the headdress of a kyogen woman to indicate that she's a woman playing a woman. She also has a female dress on. And we have essentially the percussion of the no ensemble in the back. But that's incidental, so let's keep going. Leaping ahead, I want to focus on the creation of a new brand of star by focusing here on the continuation of the androgynous appeal as late as 1685. One of the great actors, most popular actors known as Matsushima Hanya. This is the description in Saikaku's book that you can see up there. It's a mirror, great mirror of male love. This is a description of him. When just a bud in the way of boy love, this youth was already as beautiful as the diving girls of Matsushima and the Ojima Islands. Moreover, he was deeply affectionate and sophisticated at entertaining his patrons. He excelled in the serving of sake. No other actor could even approach his love letters and style. He was, in particular, by birth, so skilled in love-making, he could almost kill a man with pleasure. So we're here in the world of male love, and our actor is being celebrated not so much for his skills on stage as his fabulous skills off stage. Nevertheless, he's on stage here, and what's taking place is quite a scandal. In the middle of his play, a man who's in love with him leaps up. This is not the play. This is a break in the play. Leaps up on stage, cuts off his finger, and gives it to the actor to declare how much in love he is with him, thereby upsetting the audience and breaking the play midway through. Let's take a look at some kabuki at the same time here. This is one of my favorite paintings. And what this shows you is that still in the 1680s, homosexual love is very much at the forefront of kabuki. What we have here is a scene at the Mandayuza. Here's its title. We have the continuing sex appeal of kabuki, obviously presented by essentially nude actors in a bathhouse scene. All they have on is loincloths, and they're in a furuagai scene, a bathhouse scene, and the courtesans who they may sport with later on are being brought in to be introduced to them. What's of interest, of course, is the gallery. The gallery includes wealthy, bonze-like figures. They have shaved heads, they're probably wealthy priests, with their boy companions in the most expensive seats. We have a man and a woman here. We have a family here. This X-rated play doesn't seem to have kept this mom from bringing the little one along to the theater. But what we have is a mixed appeal in terms of these beautiful, handsome men. Are we going to think they're sexy because we're homosexuals and we want to be with them and we think they're great? Or do we think they're handsome because we're women and we like handsome men? This is a transitional era in kabuki in the 1680s. By the 1690s, it's going to be mainly women. And the appeal of these men is going to have to be to the women in the audience, not so much the men in the audience. What kind of figure is going to be appealing to men and women in the Genroku period is what we're going to be driving at now. Here's someone who looks totally different from Matsushima Hanya. This is Ichikawa Danjuro up in Edo, inventing the aragoto form, somewhat influenced, as was mentioned earlier, by Kimpira Joruri, but also, as we'll see, very strongly influenced by the iconography of his religious sect of Tantric Buddhism. This is creating an man's man, an all-male male. If you're the kind of woman that loves football players, then this is the kind of guy for you, right? And there's going to be a whole nother type I'm going to point out, but I'm not going to go into detail today, the romantic hero, the gentle one. This is the rough, tough hero invented by Ichikawa Danjuro, the aragoto hero. Now, heroics on stage, we can even find in some no plays. We can find no plays such as Youichi Soga, in which the Soga brothers defeat 4 or 5 enemies. And in kabuki, prior to the invention of aragoto, there were many scenes in which heroes defeated 5, 6, 10, 20 enemies. But aragoto was of an entirely different nature. I went through the Hyobanki books, which are actor evaluation books describing plays between 1698 and 1701, to see what Danjuro was doing on stage when he played aragoto roles. And these activities included, quote, drinking sake from huge cups, smashing down gates, tearing tigers to shreds, ripping off the heads of enemy soldiers, picking up huge boulders and throwing them around, trampling wild bears to death, pulling huge trees up from the roots and swinging them about, throwing people around like stones, and running here and there like one possessed. This is beyond just a chambara fight where you defeat 4 or 5 or 10 or 20 enemies that come to get you with your sword. This is supernatural superheroics. And these supernatural superheroics had to be made possible through transformation. Now, what are we looking at here? The last thing I want to mention, this is indeed one of the earliest single-sheet prints in the ukiyo-e tradition. It was published in black and white and colored later. So we'll also be looking at how superheroes are depicted on printed pages now. Now we're not looking at a single sheet print for individual sale, but an illustration from a play book. This is to show a little bit about how superheroes are created. In this particular play, we have young Soga Goro, maybe in his late teens. For the first time, he meets the man who killed his murderer. He, of course, being a samurai now, having left the priesthood, wants to avenge his father's death. He's obligated to avenge his father's death. He tries to attack this man, but he's too weak. He's pinned to the floor and humiliated. And after his humiliation, he runs off to his room and he runs off actually to the Fudo hall, and he prays to the Fudo deity, saying, "Make me the strongest man in Japan so I can avenge my father's murder." And Fudo appears to him in his dream and says, "Engage in aragyo, wild training rituals, and you will become the strongest man in Japan." And so he engages in, look at the difference. This is the same, that cute little boy. Look at how cute he was. There he is, he's cute. There's his brand, get used to it, the Mimasu crest. We've seen it already once in the big print, and we're seeing it again. This is the crest of the Danjuros. Everyone could recognize that with the same the same instant recognition that you have for a Portland Trails Blazers jersey. You just know that's what it is. This cute little boy turns into this. Big, muscle-bound, bulgy-eyed, huge belly, rippling muscles everywhere. What's he done? He's smashed hose, uprooted bamboos, and he's about to kick down gravestone stupas, and that's his aragyo, his training that will make him the strongest man in Japan. Now he might be able to avenge his father's death. Before he avenges his father's death, he has to prove he's the strongest man in Japan by beating in one-on-one combat his close friend and relative, Asahina, who thinks he's the strongest man in Japan, and he's going to show he's the strongest man in Japan by throwing horses into the river. Now, this would not be a real horse in kabuki in those days. I'm sure it would have been a stuffed horse. That sort of thing we do. And they're fighting, and they could hurt each other, and these two guys are actually on the same side, and so Fudo appears. A little Fudo. Why is he so little? He breaks up the fight. The little Fudo is little because he's being played by 9-year-old son of Danjiro. Danjiro is a real family man, and he's training his son to follow in his footsteps. And they break up the fight. Of course, eventually he will indeed avenge his father's murder. Now, Danjiro the First is a fascinating character with so many contradicting sides to his personality, which thankfully we can read about in a diary that he kept for about 5 years. Several things are important about what he actually said. He, to my knowledge, is the first actor who ever said, "I am a commodity for sale." He knew the situation he found himself in. In Japanese, that's ware akinai butsu douzen. But he was also very proud of his samurai heritage. He was a feisty, combative sort of a guy. This is what he wrote. The true-blooded samurai strives to achieve victory for his allies and take the enemy castle. The true-blooded actor applies pressure to other theaters and takes pride in bringing victory to the one employing him. Victory means biggest profits. For the actor, success is paramount. Even though he was a family man, though, he had two major vices. They were alcohol and women. In fact, not just women, alcohol, women, and men, meaning extramarital relationships with men and women, and drinking too much. This threatened to wreck his career, and no one would hire him, and that was when he recognized that he was a commodity for sale, when no one would hire him, and he said, "I'm a commodity for sale. I guess nobody thinks they can sell me." It was a tough time for him. He wrote, "The two problems are alcohol and sex. First, concerning alcohol, I resolve for the good of my parents to give up alcohol for as long as they live. I make this strict vow to the Sambo deities. Next, concerning extramarital sex with women and young men, to get involved in this is the worst possible thing. The marriage relationship can be traced all the way back to the first male and female deities, the marriage relationship. And the failure to produce heirs is clearly unfilial. This is fundamentally important, since the husband and the wife are the pillars supporting the family, which is the basis for the system of laws governing our society. With the exception of my wife, therefore, as long as I continue to care for my parents, I revoke all forms of erotic liaisons with either young men or women, and all other forms of erotic liaisons." What could that have meant? Because of his conflicted character in the plays that he wrote, he put conflicted characters into them, and sometimes characters who were more evil than good. This is one of his most famous. We can see the crest again. This is the evil priest Narukami, who, because he's been, as he sees it, mistreated by the emperor, has imprisoned all the gods of rain in a cave and brought drought to the land. His magical powers come from abstinence from sex and alcohol. And so it is that in this version, the beautiful poetess Ono no Komachi is sent by the realm to seduce him with alcohol and sex and destroy his powers and thereby free the dragons that will bring rain and nourishment to the realm. So he's not always playing good characters. And in these plays, he often played the deities themselves. This is the same play, and the deity Fudo, and again he made sure there was a part for his son. The deity Fudo comes and rescues the evil character and Onono Komachi, who also becomes a deity, from the paths on which they've strayed. Now there's another form of heroism and superstardom that is not aragoto, it's wagoto, or the gentle style. And one of the things shared, this is Sakata Tojiro down in Osaka, the great founder of this art. One of the things that's shared by the two of these major founders that I write about in my book, and that is that they recognize that they need to have off-stage personas in order to become superstars. You cannot be a superstar only if your on-stage persona is all that's known. And so each of them strove to create quite different off-stage superstar personas. And so it was that the great evaluation books began to write not just about what they did on stage, but their lives off stage, the scandals they were involved in, what kind of people they were. This sold the books, it sold more tickets to kabuki, it sold more prints. And Danjuro recognized that to have an effective play, you want to juxtapose these two styles. Not just have all superheroes and all romantic heroes, but have romantic heroes pitted against martial heroes. The romantic hero, Nagoya Sanza, played by Nakamura Shichisaburo. Again, this is in the era of Danjuro I. Danjuro I playing the rambunctious, tough, not very romantic, and so he always loses the girl, Fuabanzaimon. Look at their stances. This is how you tell them apart, even in these early prints. Standing pretty much erect, like this. This is going to be your romantic hero, and your superhero is going to be like, this is your marshal. And you can just tell by how they stand. Now, Danjuro II was a brilliant. First of all, I have to mention briefly that Danjuro I was murdered on stage in 1704 in the most heinous crime in kabuki. I have no time to go into that at all today, just to tantalize you and get you to buy my book, where I talk a lot about it, of course. Danjuro II was a pretty brilliant successor to his father. He took the name, he took the brand, and he knew what was going on down in Osaka, and he added humor and romance to his martial heroes. The classic example is Sukeroku right here. These women are entirely infatuated with him. He can fight too, but he doesn't look like that big, rough, tough, bulgy, ugly guy. He looks gentle, refined, handsome. Danjuro II loved this role and played it several times during his career. Let's see, backing up, we're once again looking at single sheet prints. In the early days, of course, these are black and white only. This looks colorful, but it's actually printed in black and white. I believe there was an additional overlayer of lacquer black on that beautiful kimono. The rest is hand-colored. So we still haven't developed those multicolored prints called nishikie. Let's take a look at a couple more of Danjuro II's heroes. This is one of our favorites, or my favorites, Sogagoro, a romantic and humorous hero in The Medicine Peddler. Here he's being played by Danjuro XII, who passed away just recently. This is the play that I like to direct, and I just directed in Colorado. He's a great fighter, too. Just because you're romantic, you're like James Bond. All the girls love you, and you can beat any guy or any number of guys in a fight. You've got all those martial skills plus those romantic desires and capabilities. The humor side of this particular role is yet another way to make money as a publisher and as a kabuki actor and kabuki writer, because Danjuro II wrote a lot of his own text. This is the script book for the fabulous tongue twister that Matthew once performed. It's a tongue twister that's so popular that it's even used, it's so well known that it's used today even for interviewing people who are going to be newscasters. If you can say this text, you can probably say anything that comes your way. It was so popular and people wanted to learn it so much, they went to bookstores and they bought official texts with this tongue twister. It's about a 4 or 5 minute long tongue twister in it. Danjo II loved humor writing. He was a great poet himself. And another way that we might see not so commercially ukiyo-e presented to the public was paintings on wood donated to temples to display in their ema halls. So this is not really such a big commercial venture. This is the play Yanone, or the Arrow Sharpener. This is Danjo II doing straight-out aragoto. He invented the red stripes for the aragoto superheroes. This one has no romantic, or it has some humor in it, but no romance. And this is the same play depicted in a later print. Let's leap ahead now to Danjo V. I hope I don't even have to tell you about the branding anymore, do I? We know that this is a danjuro by that crest. He's using the same stripes that his predecessor Danjo II invented. This is in his signature play called Shibaraku, Wait a Moment. In it, the actor wears the biggest costume used at all in aragoto, this huge persimmon. Persimmon color is another color associated with the danjuro line. This persimmon-colored suo, or large overrobe, to hold out the sleeves takes 2 stage assistants. In the same color, same brand, but in a very different demeanor, is the most famous print of Danjo V by the great Sharaku. In this, he's playing a samurai who is extremely worried because he thinks that his daughter has been either committed a terrible crime or been framed in a terrible crime and will be punished, maybe even executed. And so we see him wringing his hands in worry. And he's almost a caricature of these portraits that we've seen before. Let's take a look back. We're beginning to get portraiture now. And Danjuro is famous, the fifth, for his skinny eyes, his beak-like nose, and his thin mouth with almost no lips. That's what he maybe looked like. And we see it again, not particularly handsome looking, but the beak nose, the beady eyes, the skinny lips, the drooping jaw. Here he is in yet another role. And now let's leap ahead to Danjo VII. This gives you a great picture of that robe from Shibaraku, how huge it is. Look at that sword. That's not just the exaggeration of the print artist. They wore this huge long sword that no human being could conceivably draw. That's part of aragoto accoutrements, or weapons that are so big that no human being could actually really use them, just for effect. And of course, as it says here, he announces the 18 great plays. And the 18 great plays, all of them initially were by Danjo I, second, and maybe 1 or 2 by Danjo IV initially. And this cements the tradition and the brand. The Juhachiban, or ohako, has become a terminology that is entirely associated with the Danjuro line. So it's part of the branding operation. At this point, Danjo VII is phenomenally wealthy. He's famous for, I'm going to be talking more about this at Yale. He's famous for his womanizing. He had, I believe, 3 official wives, 4 official mistresses. His nickname was the man who was a millionaire in children, because all of his wives and mistresses had children. He had all of these sons to raise and to train. He lived in a huge mansion east of the Sumida River, incredibly wealthy from his income as an actor and also from all of his commercial enterprises. And this is going to not doom him, but it's going to attack him in the end. Let's take a look at the next slide, though. Among the 18 great plays, he reinvented one, and this is the very famous play Kanjincho, which he did as a matsubame mono, or a no-influence play with no style background. He, like Danjuro I, and most of the Danjos, very solicitous about making sure that his son, Danjuro, who became Danjuro VIII, got good roles, was being trained for leadership to continue the family's wealth and lineage and brand. This is one of my favorite prints, although the quality of this isn't too good. It shows Danjuro, and he continued that very close association with the Narita temple, which has the Fudo as its central image. Here he is performing the role of celebrity greeter at a kite show, which is a display of imagery from the Narita temple in Edo. And we can see him ogling these gorgeous courtesans and geisha who've been given the right to come to this kite show under escort. And they're looking back, and they're just as interested in him, the superstar actor, as he is in yet more beautiful women. This is an actual photo of his biggest gift ever made to his patron temple, the Narita temple. It burned down in the 1960s. An arsonist burned it down, but it's in Emma Hall, and here you can barely see they would display those pictures and plaques, and it probably cost him something like the equivalent of $250,000 to $500,000 for it to be built, which would have been something like, a third to a half of his salary, but of course he had income from other sources. Now this leads us to a moment in kabuki history that Matthew is going to talk about next time, and that's the tempo reforms and the tearing down of the theaters in downtown Edo, the forced relocation out to the suburbs, which Matthew will talk about. That, coupled with all kinds of attempts to reduce the wealth and impact of superstardom, both on kabuki and in publishing. So no longer were the names of actors allowed to be published in ukiyo-e prints and so forth. Danjuro himself was banished from Edo for infraction of sumptuary laws. Sumptuary laws are law, we don't have them in America. We love sumptuousness and will only reward people for it. But in Japan, if you were of a lower class and you made too much money, that was breaking the law. If you could hide it, that was okay. But if you displayed your wealth as a member of the lower class, you were breaking the law and you could be fined or banished. And he was banished for this. At first, they just banished him from Edo. He went up to this temple, Narita, which is where the airport is today, where they treated him like what he was, an elite major donor to the temple, which means fabulous lodgings. They even began to build him a kabuki stage, and they figured people would make the trek up to Narita from Edo to see his kabuki plays there. The government didn't like this one bit. He was not suffering at all. And so they said, you are banished from the entire Kanto region. At which point, he went down to Osaka and became a superstar actor in Osaka. And traveled all around Western Japan where he was allowed to act, making a ton of money and being a superstar, and there was nothing the government could do to hurt him, really. How this affected his son is my topic for another university. But this is his son, Danjuro VIII. Danjuro VIII, of course, inherited this brand, but he also had these fabulous good looks, and he discovered that he was best suited to amorous heroes, to heroes who were not rough and tough, to gentle lover boy heroes. Does that mean that he's going to continue the tradition? Just enough to pay lip service to the great martial heroic tradition. He played enough roles if you look at his record. But the way he made money for the printmakers, for the kabuki managers, was to play these incredible roles of young lover boys. All of Edo's women were in love with him. He was the first great heartthrob of the kabuki stage, maybe the second after Tojuro. But he never took a wife, he never took a male lover. The closest you could get to having this guy with you intimately was to buy look-alike dolls. Yes. Now, we're in the era of the decadent fan in kabuki. I was telling you that women were in love with this particular actor. He played Sukeroku, which is a very romantic hero, a lot of the time. Sukeroku has an optional scene in which Sukeroku, the hero, played by Danjuro VIII, has to hide in a water barrel. What did the theater managers do after he came out of the barrel and the show closed? They put the water into bottles and sold it bottle by bottle to his women fans. What did the women fans do with these bottles of Danjuro VIII infusion? I have no idea, and I'm not going to go there. What do they do with the dolls? I'm not going to go there. Of course, this is the next great tragedy of the Danjuro line. After that murder, the unexpected suicide of Danjuro VIII when he's just in his early 30s down in Osaka. I don't have time to talk about why he might have committed suicide. That's again for the next talk. However, over 300 death prints. We can make money off this guy after he's dead if we're publishers. We can make millions off of him after he's dead by selling death prints. So let's look at a couple of death prints. Shinie, which we have a couple up on display. I've been lucky to have accessed 60 of the 300 death prints. It's a wonderful study. This death print's pretty well known. What do we have going here? Around the slender, sexy wrist of our actor, Danjuro VIII, is going to drag him to the Sanzu no Kawa, the river Styx, and the crossroads of the 6 ways, and he will eventually go before the king of hell and have his fate decided, right? Meanwhile, all the women of Edo are trying to keep him in the world of the living. They're dragging on him. We see here a woman ghost. She's probably been hovering at the kabuki theater, enjoying watching him play. Now she's begging that he not be taken. This is another probably dead woman. We've got a couple of dead women and a lot of alive women, women of every class. We have this lady, looks like she's probably a serving woman, pulling as hard as she can on the sash. Even the female pets are trying to drag Danjuro back to the world of the living. And I don't have time to go into all of the text, which is wonderful. Let's look at one more Shinie. This is, now he's been taken to the river Styx. This is the river Styx, as it says, Migi, Rakugo no Tsuji, the 6 paths. And then here it says, Kore yori sai no kawara. This is the banks of the river Styx. It's an interesting place, the banks of the river Styx in Japan. Here we see a lot of babies. What are babies doing there? Anybody know their Buddhism? The babies are there because any child who dies either in the womb through a miscarriage or abortion or up through the age of 6 or 7 does not go immediately before Enma, the great king of hell, to have his or her fate decided, because the assumption is that a child that young has not yet had the opportunity to understand and to do good deeds. So those children go to this netherworld on the river Styx. The Buddha thought this was really sad. And so he said, if these little children, these aborted fetuses, 5-year-olds, if they could make a pile of 3 or 4 stones, each stone would represent a good filial deed. And if they could make those stone piles, then they would go to heaven and be with the Buddha. That's why if you go to many of these temples in Japan and Korea, you see all these stones piled up at those temples. However, the king of hell got pissed. He said, that's too easy. I'm going to send these demons to the river Styx to kick down those piles before they get to be 2 or 3 stones high. And then the Buddha got pissed, and the Buddha said, wait a minute. I'm going to have to send someone to protect these babies from those demons so they can build those piles of stones. Who did he send? Of course, Jizo. That's why Jizo is the guardian of children that you see on the roadside shrines all the time, right? So Jizo went down there and he protected the children. So the Japanese who saw this print knew all of that. That's background for what's going on in this print. In this print, we have Danjuro VIII in one of his great roles, Jiraiya, one invented for him by the great writers of the day.
He is fighting against demons, who maybe they're there for the kids, maybe they're there for him. The kids, however, are Danjuro fans, and they see Danjuro having a tough time with demons, and so instead of building little piles of stones, they're hitting the demons by throwing accurately stones to hit them on the head. Okay, that's what's going on in this wonderful print. I love this print. We got to move on. The father, this is a print in our exhibition. The father, Danjuro VII, mourning the premature death of his son, Danjuro VIII. Very sumptuous altar, certainly what you would expect of a man of the wealth of Danjuro VII. Very likely, and we can see it in his face, he's aware that he was probably the reason his son committed suicide. But I don't have time to really go into the details. That's a pretty anguished-looking face. I think he knows what he did. Now we move into the Meiji period, the modern era. This is Danjuro the IX. He's the younger brother. There were so many children, as I said, of Danjuro VII. He's the fourth son of Danjuro VII, younger brother of Danjuro VIII. He will carry kabuki from the Edo period into the modern period. This is an interesting series. We only have two of them up on display. This is good characters and bad characters from different professions, apparently. What we have here is good actors. This is the leading actor of Edo, who's very serious about his profession, who wants his profession to become worthy of aristocratic and national recognition. Along with a man from Osaka, an actor from Osaka who has the very same aspirations. After experimenting in the late 70s and late 1880s with new kabuki, Danjuro IX was very big in turning kabuki into classical theater. He went back to the great classical traditions of the 18 great plays. He was very active in having new Matsubame mono or no-based plays written, and he moved away from experimentation. So this shows him in The Arrow Sharpener, again in one of the 18 great plays, in the traditional face-on gaze, which from about the year 1800 had become a talismanic print, a print that you could hang up in your doorway. It was so fierce, it would keep evil spirits out. So it had talismanic in addition to decorative use. We're going to be coming very quickly to a conclusion here. The current stars of the Danjuro line. Danjuro XII died, I consider, pretty tragically and pretty young last February, almost exactly a year ago. He was only 66. The only play, he died of leukemia, or the after effects of 2 major bouts of adult leukemia. His father died at age 56 of leukemia when he was still just 19. This is the only play he learned from father to son, was Kanjinsho and Benkei. He had revived several of the plays. He was a very avid student, researcher into the family tradition, one of my important informants in my researches into the Danjuros. Here he is, following the tradition of Danjuro I in that play that we saw, where he began as a Narukami and in other roles, and becomes Fudo, and has a role for his son Ebizo as a twin Fudo, a revival of that, and a revival of the practice of throwing money on stage and praying to Fudo. This is money wrapped in little wrappers here. And praying to the Fudo for whatever you want, whatever powers you want Fudo to grant you. So, this Danjuro passed away recently. And his son Ebizo, who recently has been something of a bad boy and been in fights with Yakuza and so forth, and had too many extramarital affairs and so forth. Now he's really got to settle down and think about what it is his heritage requires him to do. The branding has been the same since 1680s. And it's a brand that everyone knows and makes phenomenal money now for Shochiku, the corporation that runs kabuki. And that's it for my presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here. I appreciate being invited out. As Glynne said, my specialty is rakugo, comic storytelling. So I've really done next to nothing with woodblock prints. I've always been fascinated by them. To give you a little bit of background, I've spent a number of years in Japan, and I've apprenticed with professional storytellers. That sounds pretty romantic and intriguing, but really what that entails really is washing clothes and socks and cleaning toilets and giving your master massages when he wants them. So I'm very good at cleaning toilets and massaging, perhaps not in that order though. So it's an honor to talk about Saruwaka-cho. Saruwaka-cho is a place in Tokyo that I'm going to tell you about. Almost nothing has been done on Saruwaka-cho. Not much in English and not much more in Japanese. I'm going to give you a closer look at this print. This is a triptych that is in the current rotation. That is just fabulous. Not having much background, I looked at all of the prints in the rotation that Glynne kindly sent us, and I thought, well, wow, what could I possibly talk about? So I saw this theater district, Saruwaka-cho, and there's another print I'll show you. I looked at these and I thought, well, hey, this is a kabuki theater district. But I see all of these flags, these banners. I bet I can find a rakugo theater among these, and I can somehow branch out from rakugo and discuss this. I'll just cut to the chase. I haven't found a rakugo theater, but I'm not giving up. This is kind of a point of departure for me. So I'm looking forward to researching these prints and other prints. There are quite a few prints that deal with Saruwaka-cho, or the Saruwaka district. This is basically, these are rakugo theaters. They're called yosei. This is a yosei, a rakugo theater in Osaka, just built in 2006. It was the first one to be built after the war. We'll look at this. We see lanterns up here lining, they're lined up just under the eaves, and these have the names of donors who contributed money to build this theater. We also have names of the performers, lanterns with the name of the yosei, or the theater, and that says Hanjote. I can't see it in this picture, but that's the name of the theater, and all kinds of other fun stuff, kind of like show boards or fun photo ops. You can put your face right in the hole and take a picture out here and buy your tickets over here. This is an older theater, or yosei, in Tokyo. It's called the Sue Hirote. It's in Shinjuku. Same thing, we have a lot of the lanterns, and we see the banners here. And this one here, it looks like it says Karaku, the name of an actor or a storyteller. The reason I'm showing this to you, this is a rakugo performer, very simple stage, not a very big audience. The reason I'm showing these to you is because they resemble kabuki theaters. They're like a smaller version of kabuki theaters, and we'll see that in the prints. This is not a rakugo theater. It's a misemono goya, or it's a small hut. It's a small little theater house, makeshift theater that has shows inside. Alan showed us some of the karakuri ningyo. They had the dolls inside, some of which were hoaxes, like the neck wrestling that the neck wrestler you could never beat. A lot of these misemono huts. The misemono means literally things for showing. They also had the banners up here and paintings to lure you in for sometimes a coin or two. Sometimes they were free, and they would just ask for tips after. But they would get you in, and they may or may not impress you. But this is more of what I research from the rakugo tradition. Rakugo was originally a misemono. Okay, so Saruwaka-cho. First of all, where is Saruwaka-cho? This is a map detail of Tokyo. This is, let's see, Tokyo Station. Over here is Waseda University, where I'm currently located. So this is, I believe this is the palace, right? And this, importantly, is the Sumida River that goes down through Tokyo. And if you go down in this area here, you'll end up in the Tokyo Bay. Saruwaka-cho, as Larry said, he referred to it as a suburbs. We don't think of Saruwaka-cho as this area of Tokyo as a suburbs anymore, but earlier the theater districts were located much further south, and so when the theater districts were theaters were relocated in the 1840s, they were moved up to close to the banks of the Sumida River, just northeast of Asakusa. And if we zoom in a little bit, there's the Sumida River there, and this rectangled section is Saruwaka-cho. No longer called Saruwaka-cho, by the way. There is there's a condominium, I think, called Saruwaka-cho Heights, and there's a couple buildings in the area that still have the name Saruwaka-cho, but unfortunately there are no more theaters there. I have to go back. I live just down this street. This is Koto Toi Dori, or Koto Toi Street, and it wraps around Ueno Park and goes up through Tokyo University's Hongo campus. About 15 minutes by bike from my place, but there's a place called Miyamoto, I believe, and back when Saruwaka-cho was a theater district, there was a drum maker, and I'm really into drums. And on the map, on a modern map, I found the name on a building, but I'm not sure if they still make drums. So that's something when I get back to Tokyo on the 28th of this month, I'm going to ride my bike right over there and see if there's a drum maker there. Zooming in even further, this is modern-day Saruwaka-cho, and this is where the three big theaters in this district would have been located. The Nakamuraza, the Ichimuraza, and the Kawarazaki-za. There were also at least two Ningyo Joruri theaters in this district. So I'd like to rotate this map detail 90 degrees to the left so we can compare it to an 1853 map of the same area. So I'm just going to flip it here. Okay. As we can see, north is going this way. Sumida River would be running approximately 1 block beyond the top of the image. So we just rotated it left. This is a map of the area. We can see on this map, here's the Nakamuraza, the Ichimuraza, and the Kawarazaki-za. And this is basically the main street through the theater district. This district was established after the Nakamuraza, the Ichimuraza, and the puppet theaters we had the temple reforms, and they were destroyed by fire. And if I'm not mistaken, the fire actually started at the Nakamuraza. And so the authorities were always out for kabuki, but they kind of used the fire as an excuse to get the kabuki theaters out of town, and they relocated them up in the so-called suburbs. The theater owners were ordered to relocate to the outskirts of Asakusa, and this place was named Saruwaka-cho, after a man by the name of Saruwaka Kanzaburo, who lived 1598 to 1658. He was a kabuki actor, and I believe the first theater owner, the first owner of what we consider a formal theater, the Saruwakaza. The puppet theaters, just for your information, were called the Satsumaza and the Yukiza, and they were also located here. So early 1840s is when this district was established, and the so-called Saruwaka era, or the Saruwaka Jidai, lasted until about 1972. I'm sorry, 1872. It burned down, it was rebuilt, and they had theater activities going on in this area until about 1932, when the district burned down again. They didn't rebuild after 1932. Okay, so I'm going to look at a couple of prints. The first is a set. It's a triptych, and this is all of the information that is listed. And we'll take a closer look at this one. This one is of the Ichimura Theater from the series Pictures of Prosperity in the Eastern Capital. This is the second print that's featured upstairs in the rotation. This is Saruwaka-cho in the Eastern Capital from the series 100 Famous Views in the Various Provinces. And we're going to take a much closer look at these now. Okay, so I think that this triptych and the next single sheet print we're going to look at stand out from a lot of the prints we've seen today. We've had actors featured, or one or two or three people, but there's just so much going on in this triptych. And when I looked at all of the prints that Glynne sent me, I knew right away I had to do this one. There's just so much going on. You can spend hours and hours just looking at this. First of all, where is the artist asking us to look? There's just so much going on. What are your eyes drawn to? And I asked myself this, and I also took this to my mother, father, and my brother, and I asked them the same question. Where do your eyes go when you look at something like this? And my father said, well, look at the ridge on that building. That's something else. Like, well, Dad, anything below the ridge of the building? And he says, well, there's just so much going on. It's really hard to look at. And so it was hard for me to look at, too. So I thought it would be a good idea to break this up a little bit. Where did our eyes go? Well, signboards and displays are visible across the entire center of the triptych. Look at all this going on here. Okay? We have signboards with names and acts in the program listed. And we have paintings. And we have the crest of the Ichimura Theater up above. Next, just the sheer number of people is just incredible. It's very hard to look at them all at once, but on first look we see people are wearing primarily shades of blue. Now, why was this? Could it be because of the laws on being too flamboyant, or rather not being flamboyant? So this is a subdued color that people could wear. Compared to the print we'll take a look at in a minute, this triptych strikes one as rather two-dimensional. It does have its 3D effect, but compared to the other print, it's much more two-dimensional. let's zoom in a little bit. This is the left print in the triptych. And if we look, we can see right? We see all of these people, the signboards up here. And these actually now look to be 3D themselves. They look to be they look like carved dolls. And I'm going to show you something. There's something like this. I don't know if you've been to Osaka and seen the Omukai Ningyo and the Tenjinbashi Shotengai. But these are kind of miniature lifelike kabuki actor dolls in kabuki scenes. We see, in general, we see people kind of lingering around. They don't seem to be going anywhere. Could they be looking up at these signs, deciding if they want to buy a ticket? Do they just want to be there to experience the kabuki atmosphere and can't afford a ticket? Have they purchased a ticket and they're just being social before the show? Back here, because this isn't directly in front of the Ichimura Theater, these are shops selling various wares. We look at the center print. We're moving over towards the Ichimura Theater. We see the crowd actually growing. There's more people in this picture. I'll zoom in a little bit more in a second, but we can see people also with hoods on and look like they have masks covering their faces. So I'm wondering if these aren't people incognito. People in the higher classes weren't allowed to go to kabuki. It was an art that was for the chonin, really. So are these people who aren't supposed to be there? Are they incognito? There's many of them. This is a woman. I'm looking for swords too. This looks like a sword here. And this looks like a hood. So is this a samurai going to see kabuki? I'm not sure, but it looks that way. This is the right print. And we see people carrying food. Lots and lots of food. What's all this food doing in the picture? Where is it going? Probably right into the theater or to nearby tea houses where they're having pre-show or post-show parties. We see somebody carrying what looks like a roll of felt or carpet. And in the previous print, we saw a shop selling these. I don't know exactly what they are. Are they cushions being sold to sit on in the theater? I doubt it, but I'm not exactly sure. Up here, we see paintings. Right. Yeah, scenes from kabuki plays, and probably the one that's being shown at this theater at this time. Out here is, we'll see a very close look at this. This is a signboard, illustrated signboard jutting out. So if you're walking down the street, you could see this from down the street. You can't see the front of this theater from 2 blocks down the street, but if you're 2 blocks down, you can see this jutting out from the theater. We'll get a better look at this in the other print. I know it's not fair to try to look at these images in this size, so let's zoom in even a little more. Now we know what all of these people are doing here. This says Kido. They're collecting money, selling tickets for the theater. These are people who work at the theater. But they also have these hoods on, so that it makes me think that these people out here may not be incognito. Maybe they're cold. I can always rely on my teacher, Larry, to help me out. Dumplings, perhaps. Maybe this is an order that wasn't eaten completely and it's being taken back. but the sheer array of people and the work that had to have gone into this piece it's just fabulous. We see crests. I believe that these are actors' crests. Have a better picture of that painting here. As we'll see, we have what look like real grass and flowers lined in. And the lanterns. So we can kind of see, I showed you the picture of the yosei. We can see similarities. Rakugo, in many cases, took directly from kabuki. The theater designs, story material too, a lot of it came from kabuki. Yeah, I was really looking forward to zooming in and trying to read these. I can make sense here. This is dai-ichi, dai-ni, dai-san, dai-yon. But these are just, it's basically chicken scratch. If we look into the kabuki nempyo or something, we could date this print to probably the plays that were being shown at this time, and we could probably look. We could say, I see. That's what that is. But it's really difficult to read. It's really not legible like this. Here we see a sign that says "Oiri." They're welcoming in great numbers to the theater. They want a full house, and we kind of see a 3D element to this. They're walking back, and I'm guessing that this is the entrance into the theater, because they're selling the tickets here, welcoming people in. And they're not welcoming them in quietly. They're definitely yelling out like barkers, saying, "Come one, come all, step right up, get a kabuki ticket." And there they go. I'm assuming into the kabuki theater. When we go upstairs to look at these, we're going to have to really be careful because everybody's going to want to go and see the real thing. I haven't seen the actual one, so I'm excited to go upstairs myself. And here, this is not a theater in Tokyo. This is the Minamiza Theater in Kyoto. And this is, we see a lot of the same thing. And these are legible, and these are actors' names. They're presenting the actors that are going to be appearing in this theater for the upcoming year, for the upcoming season. And these are about the size of a full-grown man. Very large signboards. And then, again, they're continuing the tradition of putting out paintings of actors in various kabuki scenes. We see the lanterns. And this is in Kyoto, right off the Kamo River. Here's a closer look at those scenes with the dolls. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure if I could read. These are just very difficult to decipher, but upon closer look, we might. I don't know why a rice shop would be right next to a kabuki theater if these are indeed bales of rice, or are they donations to the theater to congratulate an actor on or the theater owner for opening this great show with these great actors. That's what I'm guessing that these bales of rice are. And this is what I was talking about. This is in Osaka, near Tenmangu. But yeah, we see it up above here. These are basically very large bunraku puppets. Look at the faces. They look like bunraku puppets. And these are called omukai ningyo, and they're used to welcome the divine spirits during the Tenjin Matsuri. Here's a model a life-size model of the Nakamuraza Theater at the Edo Tokyo Museum. Now, this is the other print, and we're going to go upstairs in just a couple minutes, so I'll go a little bit quicker through this, because I know we want to see the real ones upstairs. What is the author asking us to look at? Well, we see this is one of those illustrated signboards that are jutting out, and we can see crests on the kimono, so we know who these actors are. And this is the play Love and Deep Snow at the Mountain Barrier. And this is Nakamura Shikan IV playing this actor here. And then this is Sawamura Tanosuke III. And we know that because of the time this was printed and because of their crest and the roles they played. This is a close-up view of that sign. Next, we see this fabulous street. Look at all those banners, and they have names of actors, and they have names of theaters, and these are banners that are most likely presented to actors and theaters by patrons. Local stores may also be putting them up. We see all of these lanterns, and this looks like maybe an actor's name. And all of these little tiny little bubbles, I assume, are people's heads. It's the bustling theater district. What's important here is not all the people like in the previous triptych. It's the signage. It's like, wow. When you go to the theater district, you're just left doing this. What am I going to see? Well, let me consult with my wallet. Can I go? One thing I was really happy to find, what's this guy pointing at? There's somebody right here. And I think this is just playfulness on the part of the on the part of the artist. I tried to look at what he might be pointing at. Is he just pointing down the road? Let's all go have a good time in the Saruwaka-cho Theater District, perhaps. But yeah. So this is the modern view. And just to give you an idea of where we're looking at, where we are in perspective to the actual district. The first triptych was this. Where exactly is this on the map? Right here. Right in front of the Ichimuraza Theater. Up out here would be the Sumida River running along and down. And this is Koto Toi Dori running down here. So that's exactly where we are in Saruwaka-cho for this print. Now, how about this one? Where are we for this? This is the Nakamuraza Theater. So we are right here in the middle of the street looking straight down, all the way down. How do we know we can? Well, it's difficult to see, but we see one theater, 2 theaters, and I know this is getting difficult, but 3 theaters. Nakamuraza, Ichimuraza, Kawarazaki-za. So we're getting a full view of the street. And there are all kinds of other prints that feature Saruwaka-cho, and I'll just go right through these. This is interesting. We recognize this, don't we? This is the one in the rotation upstairs. This one is. But look at this. This is the Ichimuraza, but this is the Nakamuraza. Now, I'm wondering if some of the same blocks or sections of the blocks weren't used for this, because they're almost a mirror image of each other. This will require more research. But there are all kinds of them, as you can see. And they're fabulous. Here's a night view of Saruwaka-cho. You see I'm guessing that these are courtesans luring in customers. I'm not sure. But then the final 4 I'd like you to look at are from, I believe this area is called Machizan. I'm not exactly sure the name of this area, but it's an elevated area, I think like on Rokuchome or Nanachome in Asakusa, but you can get an aerial, kind of an elevated view down to, yes, indeed, Saruwakacho. Nakamuraza, Ichimuraza, Kawarazaki-za. Same thing. Now we're up here for a temple visit, but yes, here we have our district again. So this figures into, now we are at the temple ourselves, looking down. And finally, a couple of courtesans. See in the background, this is Sensoji, the famous Asakusa temple. And here's Saruwakacho. And with that, I think we ought to go enjoy the real prince.
Yes.